Felt a little bit roughy. Yeah, oh, it's officially said. I'm gonna go down this way. Don't make any trouble.
He married Shannon Rashaw's.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just. Yeah.
I did a project for Port Orange. You know, they got Eric Kennedy.
I've heard the name.
They're testing their permit. All the roads, staff is gonna create air. It didn't exist. And so, you know, it's like, there goes the tested by all this stuff. And so we wouldn't do the administrative hearing. Or it was the city representative, that was the engineer, you know, had been turned. So we had weeks. Right, whole shit. That was real exciting.
Sometimes it takes two, you gotta read it over time.
Well, they were being, that's some of those things.
Whatever became of that, is that still a goal or did they?
So serious.
Oh, I thought we don't, that was more experience.
Yeah.
His dad was bringing his family, right? And they were talking, making projects on State Road. They got on the phone and like the next day, there's a fast track back again. And it's like, you know.
She's been seven.
But it's just one of those things that the speed. You can work. I think. You can do something.
Or you can say, well, I was thinking, I supposed to lose the parties. But you can get inside the building and yell at it.
No, that's, you know, what I'm doing is looking at property down in some of the states. So they can get a bunch of state secret.
Where you stay there.
Well, it's like 25 square meters. The long personal I see the sheriff. I've been there for probably 30 days. So I see the one time.
Raising the hogs and chickens and weeds.
Oh, man, they just complain in planes. They're full of coke. This was one of the major drug sites. I think I was sweating. Hey, trash is illegal. Shit was the same with libertarian airlines. That's one of those places where there's actually.
I'm 30-something soft and
I just want to have, you know, permit stuff, like, stuff, you know, like the liability and all that.
don't even bother asking them to be sure. Well, thank you, Rick, for doing all that. It's still funny. I want to be in the back of the, I want to look past the back of the, and you're asking for permission. You're going to find a way to say no.
No, that's coming.
You're going to find a way to say this.
That's what they're talking to. So he's never seen it. It's tough. They're gonna have to do. I was literally told that's the training. I did 9 years.
Sorry?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's PE training. It's 2 years ago. It's been a year running the surface.
So you're a surveyor.
Yeah.
And John and I, we worked on St. Patrick's, the appraisals office back in the '70s. John, I don't know.
Oh, it's
Jimmy was married to John.
yeah, let's say I said Jimmy like 6 months ago. I'm Candace on the show.
It cost $69.
And because he was a BMW guy. Oh, just
Based on everything. People want to just get a rag game.
Well,
Well, I will.
Right.
We were quite through Jimmy, John, and I.
Yeah, they do.
And I forget how every time I'm something. I'm working way out.
True, when I got there, it was massive. Kevin.
Kevin, John, Casey, and I. Some other locals. We also down that track.
Yeah, I work with a lot of these. So when Brady's retired, so basically took it for this software here. And that's what was really surprising. He's have some. No, it's not. It's for people that they figured it so then I'm going to do these. And a lot of there's PC.
Yeah.
They brought in a secretary.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, well,
So
it's dangerous.
the February 5th, 2024 meeting of the Environmental and Natural Resources Advisory Committee is being called to order. I would like to thank Ginger Adair for borrowing this gavel, recognizing the fact that we were being dissed for not having a gavel. And I would like to thank our member, Jack Surratt, who I hear, he didn't tell me, but I heard the rumor that he has provided us with this very handsome, very appropriately weighted gavel. Now that we have that out of the way, would you like to call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, Ms. Lammers,
Here.
Ms. Gow,
Here.
Ms. Anderson. Here. Ms. Brosner.
Ms. Brosnan. Oh, here.
Mr. Burton,
Present.
Mr. Fitzsimmons. Mr. Hollick,
Here.
Ms. Jameson. She's not online either, but will you let us know if she joins? Mr. Geronimo.
Here.
Mr. Lights.
Here.
Mr. Lumber.
Here.
Ms. Morrissey. Here. Mr. Surratt.
Here.
Counselor Gibbs. And Ms. Whitaker. Here. All right, we have a forum.
Terrific.
That's a good reminder. Thank you.
That is a good reminder. Did everyone have an opportunity to read those fabulous minutes?
I did read,
Were they not fabulous? Would somebody like to?
I was like, I had better get here on time because it says I didn't show up till 1:02.
Yeah, use it.
So, would someone, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our January 6th, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
We
I'll
have
second.
moved by Mr. Baumberg, seconded by Ms. Morrissey. Any discussion, questions, comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. And we will get into our business for today with our guests who have come to share their knowledge with us.
Okay, so the first thing we have for you today is a presentation by Jack Feldman from the Central Florida Regional Planning Council. He's going to present some of the work that the Planning Council has been doing related to predicting future rainfall. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And then if you have questions, depending on your questions as we go, you want to stay to the end, do you have a preference?
Hey, you guys could stop me again. There's a lot of technical details on the front of this project, so if you guys have any questions throughout, just stop.
Excuse me, could you speak a little louder? I can, we're in front of the corner.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Again, so if you guys have any questions throughout, just stop me and we could go over, dive into more detail anytime comes up. Yes. Okay, so I'm John Bushell, and I'm the GIS director with the Central Florida Regional Planning Council. And what I'm going to be presenting on today is planning for future extreme rainfall. And this project came through a big CDBG NIC grant. And this project is named Mitigation Assessment and Planning through Regional Collaboration. And for those who don't know what a regional planning council is, so in 1962, there were 10 regional planning councils that were founded throughout the state. And we are an area-wide association of governments, and we convene, assist, inform, plan, and collaborate. So we work with local jurisdictions, we work with regional scale projects, and we also collaborate with other regional planning councils to do some statewide assessments. In the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, we serve 8 counties, which is Brevard, Marion, Volusia, Orange, Seminole, Sumter, Lake, and Osceola. And our regional planning council, it is the second largest in population and first in land area. Our major program areas are community development, economic development, health and food systems, GIS, emergency preparedness, and resilience. And one thing that we really focus on at the Regional Planning Council is we don't work in silos. We, in all of our projects, every step of the way, we collaborate with all of our departments to make sure we're planning for a holistic approach and making sure that the plans that we come up with all have each lens applies to that. So the project that we've been working on for the last about 2.5, 3 years now, and it's been going longer on that planning phase, is a big CDBG NIC grant. So this grant was awarded to us in 2022, and it's a $1.5 million grant. And with that, we're working with us and 5 other regional planning councils, where we're looking at flooding as it pertains to future extreme rainfall. So how the current 100-year storm will be projected out into the planning horizons in 2040 or 2070, and what those impacts may be like. And with that, we're doing some assessments. So some background on this project. In 2021, the Resilient Florida legislation came about, and it requires communities to look at flood hazards in the future, looking at coastal hazards, as well as looking at this future extreme rainfall flooding. And this is for a lot of it, usually flooding and these assessments have been focused on coastal communities, but with this new legislation, push that initiative inland, so more inland communities could understand future extreme flood risks. And with that, the peril of flood statute moved forward in 2015, which was very heavily geared towards coastal communities. However, part of that is looking at the future extreme rainfall flood risk. So this project, the big question and reason we went about this project is looking at future extreme rainfall. With all this legislation, so much of it was focused on coastal communities. There was really a big gap of inland communities and what future flood events may look like. And this has been made very evident through recent hurricanes. So we had Irma, Ian, and more recently, seeing these more frequent future extreme rain events and see these widespread impacts of both people and people's property. And then with that, having a better understanding of these future extreme rainfall factors really help jurisdictions and counties, cities plan more holistically and be more prepared for these rainfall events. And the goals and value of this project, we've been working to build regional stakeholder collaboration, develop technical applications to analyze vulnerabilities to extreme rainfall risks. This complements the vulnerability assessments that went through with Resilient Florida legislation. We're trying to develop a regional approach to mitigation where we overlook the boundaries, because flooding is a multi-jurisdictional regional issue. So we're really encouraging that collaboration on working on mitigation projects that the positive impacts are felt between multiple jurisdictions. And then we're also working towards building a consistent statewide approach to looking at this future extreme rainfall. So we compare different areas of the state utilizing the same data sets. So with this project, we've had a lot of stakeholder engagement. We have done a lot of modeling, looking at future extreme rainfall, as well as ground truthing it to a lot of our more recent rainfall events to see how it was on the model and what the impacts have been in real time. And then with that, we're doing a regional mitigation needs assessment where we're coming up with mitigation priority areas, which are bigger areas that encompass multiple jurisdictions. And then in those areas, we're working with different project partners to come up with some project ideas. And with that, we're creating a regional project list of projects that can help mitigate against flooding that benefit multiple jurisdictions at once. And then part of that as well, we are working on 2 small area conceptual plans in those priority areas. And we're making some web-based resilience tools and coming up with these data sets that are publicly available for everyone to utilize. And with that, we have not been working just with the regional planning councils. We've had a ton of stakeholders with multiple universities and state agencies throughout. So as we've been going through this, we've been getting the stamp of approval from different change factors that we're utilizing for this rainfall flooding, the methodology that we're using. We wrote in FDEP, FDEM, we spoke about the flood hub, we worked with FIU to make sure that these change factors are in line with the data that's around and that everyone is comfortable with. So with that, one of the first steps of this project was creating an ArcGIS tool where we can put in all of our base data sets, and it essentially spits out flood outputs for the 100-year 24-hour storm, but projects that through 2040 and 27 using different change factors. And with this, this is a planning tool. This is an H&H model. It is utilized to be able to put more resources where it's necessary based off of these results. Though we have done some comparisons of the different countywide H&H models and it's essentially flood modeling, and if you like, it has all the stormwater put into that flood model, so air models water. We're utilizing the latest LiDAR flights, and then from there, we take all the LiDAR and go through and draw lines on where the water should pass through, like there's culverts, if we know there's an overpass, so we make sure that water flows through properly, but it doesn't encompass the entire stormwater system. And then with that, we create flood outputs that can be utilized and visualized, and those are paired with depths. So with that, we did a big statewide study to determine these change factors. Because at the time of the beginning of this project, Flood Hub, they are currently working on some other change factors to utilize in flood modeling. However, the goal of the project was to utilize those change factors, but because they've been for a while, we had to go another direction. But we have worked with all these technical advisory committees and the people who are going to be creating those change factors were involved with that and gave us a standard approval for these studies moving forward. So we used the Cordex median, that was the main thing that was for our change factors. So we have those change factors predicted out to 2040 and 27. And then with that, a lot of the times change factors, they're more of a countywide, but we've used some different GIS tools to make more of a statewide raster. So you get with all the rain stations and all of the sites, you kind of create a statewide data set to show different amounts of rainfall, and it's more of a site-by-site basis. So going into the modeling, the big thing that we're using right now is that Atlas 14 rain surface, and we're focusing on the 24-hour 100-year rainfall event. We have our change factors that we created that we're utilizing. We're looking at soils, land use, land cover. We especially maybe lake points that determine what's flooding, whether it's lakes filling up and determine where that flooding occurs. We're looking at the major roadways, impervious surfaces, the burn lines, which I explained, we're going into the DEMs to make sure water flows correctly, and the latest LiDAR plates that the state recently put. And then these are what all these layers look like. And then through modeling, these are what the results look like, where we have a new rain raster of both near and far term rain events.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah. What?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Back on the map where the sensors are,
Yes.
were the sensors placed for the purpose of the study, or are we dealing with legacy sensors?
Legacy sensors.
Because it seemed to me it looked sparse for the size of our region, and as you said, the second in population. So just, thank you.
So with that, looking at the data sets, we pulled all the rain, and then when all that projected out, we have some predictions of what the current 10, 25, 15, 100-year storm would look like, and just how those numbers increase over time. So looking at now the 24-hour 100-year storm, you're looking at about 12 inches of rainfall. And then with the change factors, you're looking at 17 in the 2040, 2050 planning horizon, and then 19 in the 27 planning horizon. However, with more frequent extreme rainfall events, we are starting to see more of these rainstorms around this range than those currently occurring. So with that, going into this modeling, we're talking with Volusia County, we kind of took a step back when we have these outputs, but getting down to the data that really drives the decision making. So what we did is we took the statewide rainfall raster, and then with that, we calculated out those change factors, so you can get more of a whole statewide approach to see what an extreme rainfall event could look like at a site-by-site basis. So for testing purposes, I just drew a random polygon in Volusia County to show how these data sets could be utilized in future planning and policy decisions. But so we have this right here, and then paired with that raster and just a few GIS tools, you can see what the minimum, maximum, and average amount of rainfall will look like in that 24-hour 100-year rain event. And then you can also see what those future conditions may look like at that site.
Excuse me,
Yes.
if I'm reading that right, is it looking like it's going up 5 inches per year, give or take?
So that would be the 2040, 2050 planning horizon. So that would be about 15 years from now, looking at, and then the other one's 27.
Okay, so it's maybe an inch a year then.
Mhm. And with those change factors, it's like a multiplier of like 1.2 to 1.7, but it's because it's a statewide raster, it varies from foot to foot, essentially.
Thank you. It's just a significant number.
And then with this project, looking ahead, we have, we're selecting projects for our regional mitigation project list. We're coming up with 2 conceptual small area mitigation plans. We're creating these regional-based web exposure tools. We are upgrading our GIS tool to the most current version of GIS because that version is sunsetting in the next few months. And then we are now trying to work with jurisdictions throughout our regions to implement either our outputs or different parts of this modeling process into their decision-making plans. And then, do you guys have any questions?
Wendy?
Okay, 2 questions, and I was just about to write them down, but, so I'm not sure if I'll remember the second one. Would it be your recommendation as an expert that policies at the county level should be rewritten to accommodate a 17.4-inch 100-year storm event, given that it's only 15 years away, and most things we are building now, we would expect would persist for at least another 15, if not 35 years, 45 years. Should we be developing policies, which is what we're here to do, that account for these projections?
I do believe so, especially when we start looking at these data and see this rain that's happening more and more frequently. With the housing, we do have to think of the future. So I purchased a house recently, and it was built in 1959. So a house is a long-term standing structure and investment. So you do want to make sure you are planning for the future.
My second question, if I may, my second question is, can you go back to the map that you showed very briefly about with Volusia County, a map of Volusia County with some, I think, flood zones maybe represented? Yeah.
Yes, so these are our flooded outputs, and the dark blue are bodies of water, and the teal color, those are the swamps and wetlands.
Right.
So the red and green are those areas outside where the flooding occurs.
Okay, so, you know, FEMA's flood maps get updated every so often. Not sure how or if they will ever be updated again. Should the county be using model results like this to redraw their own floodplain maps to ensure that we are not building in floodplains or building in areas that we know are floodplains in appropriate ways? I don't think we should be building in floodplains. That's just my personal opinion. But if we are going to build in floodplains, which we do seem to keep doing, it would be nice to know if indeed it's a floodplain before we're building it, so we can do the compensating storage and all the other things we're supposed to do. Should we be using these results to update our maps?
I think that's a bit of a tricky question because flooding occurs in so many different things for different models and different products share with different flooding areas. So I really think it can't be we only use this flooding. It has to be a multifaceted approach to make sure that we're planning for everything. Like a lot of the FEMA flood zones, yes, they do have that inland flooding, but a lot of the coastal factors are put into those maps where this is only what it gets right. So I think with all these models, it's just a bunch of different tools in the toolbox, and everything has to be looked at and be planned for.
Thank you. Tyler, then Tom, then Bill.
So first, I want to take a guess. It's H&H hydrology and hydraulics, maybe. Does that sound so? Okay. Which should make sense. So the question I had is looking at the storm rainfall predictions, there seems to be a plateau being reached. You have a 15-year period where you're showing a pretty big jump in storm size, and then a 30-year period with what is, relatively speaking, not a very large jump. Is there a reason behind that that's explained, or I'm mostly just curious if the state dries out?
So looking at state statutes, so a lot of the rules and part of legislation, and you're looking at that 2040, 2050 planning horizon, and then the 2070, 2080-ish. So that year isn't an exact year, it's just that planning horizon looking to that future time.
Well, I mean, I'm more wondering, why are we seeing, like right now, we're seeing the acceleration of the size of storms, and it seems like all of a sudden it's just going to stop in 20 years. I'm curious if there is, like, I don't know the validity of these models. I'm not at all familiar with the models that are being used. So I'm wondering if there's explaining factors in there. Certainly we're seeing storms now that have 18, 20 inches of rain. We saw that with Milton. And it comes down to a statistical analysis question. And I think we can all figure out that if we've had more than one of those in 100 years, that our percentage chance right here might be more than 1 in 100. But, that gets into, I kind of want to also have a response that we don't set the rainfall values. The county identifies the design storm off of a rainfall value chart that is done at the state level. And so if the county starts getting into that policy that, as we've discussed in the past, I think that's dangerous from a you know, what, if we're setting rainfall, that sets us up for something that we have to defend legally. So I wouldn't talk about altering our defined rainfall values from the state definitions. Myself, if we want to plan for more, I would say just pick a different storm off of the list as the way to get there. But
Could you repeat that, please? Get what? Off the list?
there's a list of like, there's a matrix, there's like 100 storm events. Rather than try to change the values in the matrix, just
I got
pick
that.
a different one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, like that's in a sense, like I'm not trying to take a position that I think we should do that, but I'm just suggesting that like if there's going to be an approach towards something, let's do something that involves less legal defense necessity. So I am curious though, if there is a reason that we're seeing that slowdown in the growth rate, or if that's just something that's unexplained in the models.
So a lot of that, it's just looking at the data and the way process is tracking and looking about past 2070, a lot of that data isn't available. It's too unpredictable to really model past 2070, 2080. We, for some of our future storage surge events, we go up with 2100, but anything after that just gets a, the data is not predictable enough to go as far out.
Sorry, to interrupt just a second, to Tyler's point about maybe pick a different design storm. We use, the county uses the NOAA 14 as the amount of rainfall. Presumably, hopefully, maybe, NOAA will at some point update that, because right now that data is from 2013. So the predicted rainfall doesn't look like what the rainfall actually looks like, but that's what we use because that would mean that they're the experts, right? It's just not updated. But if you picked a different design storm, let's say, oh, everybody decided everybody needs to design for the 100-year storm and then the whatever, bigger storm in a closed basin. If NOAA then updates the rainfall amounts for those storms, now you're double designing high, right? So that could, if you change your code to say we're designing to a different storm and then NOAA changes what the rainfall is for that storm. Now you may be over.
To be continued on that one, Tom, Bill, Jessica, then Wendy. Then not Wendy.
Thank you. To partially answer your question, Wendy, about should we be using this information as our regulatory tools? When you do that, you accept a certain amount of liability. I'm thinking at the present, it might be a good idea to let FEMA accept that liability as these are the flood zones. If we say that when you use these, it may change because this is still modeling. Another thing that what caught me, part of our charge is to help county staff rewrite rules or amend rules to make us more resilient. And one of the major tools that we use, it's in our code, is that we should be relying on the official Volusia County Soil Survey, which is 50 years old. The soil survey, unlike the modeling you're doing here, most of that stuff is projections based on current trends. What's on the soil is going to stay that way. Are those maps available to us to use as a model, as a tool for development, regulatory at this point? Because that is much more readily, I don't know, there's got to be a lot more science behind it. Thank you. I mean, could I go online and pull all these up? If Tyler here wants to go online to get a site, first thing he's gonna look at are the soils. And he's gonna go to the official soil survey, which is like 50 years old. If there's something newer, can he use that?
Right now, if you go on the county's website and utilize our interactive maps, you can get the soil information and it's on the 1980 USGS soil survey.
Right, and what, yeah, it was 1980, Schofield. Tyler Schofield's part of that, as was I.
And
So
it's
we
not
haven't done it, those were paperbacks about this thick, these to hand them out in the Ag Center. So we really haven't done much since then, but they have something here that probably is more current. And if we could use that as part of a design tool, shouldn't we be doing so?
We agree that any kind of updated data that's defensible should be utilized in the policies that you have.
Okay, that's the liability part, the defensible thing. Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Tom, Bill.
Wait,
Oh.
let's answer that question. So do you have different soil data?
Yeah.
So it was the standardized statewide data set that we're utilizing for this modeling, I could get you the source and data on it, but it is the most up to date one. We do utilize that data set to a lot of complaint information. But it is from the authoritative source. I can't necessarily it's from USGS and enrollment, but I can get back to you with that.
Appreciate that.
And ultimately, if I can just chime in on this, the soils don't change a whole lot other than urban alterations and our man-made alterations of the soils. The dirt doesn't pick itself up and move too frequently on its own. Years, fortunately, we're not doing this ground as much, so it is fairly valid and accurate.
Thank you, Phil.
So in coastal areas, you've looked at the increased rainfall, but in coastal areas, if we have sea level rise also, it will keep the water from going out. Have you combined this with the sea level rise?
So not at the moment, some of that compound flooding, that's definitely a next step we want to work on as regional planning councils to prepare those. But we are doing a lot of studies and we just finished up the vulnerability assessment here in County related to sea level rise and then there about the storm surge. And we're also looking at Sunday flooding with that, with those projected sea level rise curves. So one of the things that we'll actually be working on, we were talking to Lake County and they have a lot of planning out in Pastor, I'm sure you guys do as well. But we kind of want to look at this modeling and look at some riverine flooding and see how those compare together. So, you know, this is definitely the start of what we want to do with the rainfall.
Thank you, Joseph and Sarah Lee.
Yeah, two quick questions. And one has been touched on, which is the note on rainfall. My question is, well, how do we already build it into our models? And it sounds like the answer is no. So is there a process where a region, if we have this study, can go to them and say, we have updated information, can you update it? Basically like what we did with FEMA with a regional map amendment. Is there a way to say, no, we've got more data to share?
With that, long-term for the state, the hope is that flood will definitely take over. But you've got to essentially house on the models, which, you know, just waiting on that timeline and when that is fruition.
And then just to keep everyone, or me, and looking at the numbers, and we may not have this right off the bat, do we remember the record inches of rainfall during the last hurricanes that we were looking at? That Volusia got, like during Ian and Nicole?
Yeah, those, Ben had that information, based on different stations throughout, because again, it was not a uniform rate. So specifically, Ian, that was more of a rain event than Nicole, and you saw areas up about close to 18 inches.
So that's the,
It's 2070.
right, protection.
And I think we saw some, Tad, you remember, I think we saw some 2021 in some spots, right?
So too.
Yeah.
I did too.
Okay. And
But on your first point, so the flood hub is funded by the Florida Resilient Florida program. And the intent of the data and the modeling that will ultimately be housed with them is that then it could be adopted by the state and used for regulatory purposes, and it would be consistent. Each place in the state will, of course, won't get the same amount of rainfall, but it would be like an adopted data set, right? That then I guess the local government could use to say, this is the rainfall we're going to design to. And just a little, like, put a note in your brain, later in the meeting, we're going to talk about comparison of other cities and counties and stormwater rules. And there are some other places that have adopted, here's the storm. Not like we're going to use the NOAA 100-year, 24-hour, but this many inches of rain is what you're going to decide to. So there are places that have done that. And we'll just touch on that probably today, and more to follow.
And the last thing before I turn it over is that I think that when we look at inches in the projection to 2070, given that the local feedback right now is that we're facing a reaction to large adverse weather events, I think we'll probably catch up faster than planning for 2070 to respond to those.
Thank you, Sarah Lee. And then Melissa.
My question is kind of some of your last comment, Ginger, and based on some of the discussion about whether or not, as we consider future policy, will direction change the storm event. I can't say I'm understanding all of this, particularly the variables that go into the model. But I'm curious in terms of we're East Central, but you talked about a lot of the other regional planning councils are doing similar work. I'm curious, what, if you know, where are they in process? Are they seeing similar, like, are they using the same variables in their methodology? Are they seeing anything consistent, like across all of these regions, so that making a change at a state level is something that we might actually see happen?
Yes, so all of us are using the same variables, and as we were calibrating the model, we made sure that it worked everywhere throughout the state. So as we were tweaking it, like we fixed one area and kind of skew somewhere else, and we essentially all work together to make sure that we're all comfortable with results for our counties. And everything does look really good. And right now, we're definitely the earlier side of working with the jurisdictions to implement some of the results that we've had, but everyone is working differently to do stuff. Like, we just started talking with the city of Ocoee, and they want to see if they can utilize this for some of their CRS documents that they're doing. So we are trying to, we don't want to make sure these data sets just kind of live and just aren't doing anything. We really want to work with our jurisdictions to consider the best ones.
And I thought at the beginning, completion was September 2025.
Yes.
Is that a common completion date for others or?
Yes, we might have put in for an extension, but the modeling at this point is complete. It's in draft ones with the projects finalized, but I don't see those out much. Now it's just more writing and additional analysis.
And how are the water management districts working with all of this?
They've been in most of our conversations. We have talked through some concerns with them. A lot of it came from the South Florida Water Management District with different control structures on the model, but with that, this is not going engineering, like this is more of a planning approach, and in some cases, without taking into account some of those control structures down there, it's the worst case scenario they don't know to work, but they have given us approval, and if where they had issues, we work through that.
I think the work is really important, 15 years, that is not far away.
My question is kind of for the room. So we worked very hard, staff worked even harder to get the stormwater ordinance redone. It's going to council next week. And we were left with some lingering concerns about whether we had gone far enough with our ordinance because of the flooding that is already 2070 level here. We've already experienced that. And we decided that we would go back to the minimum standards, which is what we're kicking off today. And we asked for you to come and help educate us. What's new news for me today, and I'm trying to understand, is the concern that Tyler brought up, that if we can't justify a stricter standard, it opens us up to legal challenges compared to what Ginger, and then we are using NOAA tables, and then compared to Ginger saying that other jurisdictions, other municipalities or counties do have stricter standards. So I'm just trying to understand if we have a way to move forward and be stricter, if we believe, if we net out that we need to be. We've been concerned fairly uniformly up until this point. Did I misunderstand?
The only thing I would add to that is Tad's in the back of the room, but, most of us are not stormwater engineers, and so, I've heard Tad have good arguments for maybe the design storm, this is the thing, maybe what y'all did already with the 6-inch safety factor covers that, right? And so it's probably not a discussion maybe for today, it's probably more like down in the weeds. But I at least would be interested in hearing like what are the pros and cons from the engineering perspective of changing this standard? Is it the design?
The ways to
Is it
skin the cat.
rainfall? Is it the safety factor that you've already, recommended? So I think that that's a discussion that needs to be had.
Thank you. So a quick,
One quick thing to add on to that. When we start talking about it, we have to talk about the different levels of regulation. And so what you're seeing is that from our comprehensive plan, where I think a lot of the data that we're talking about is appropriate because it's planning level data. Once we start getting into land use regulations, that's when you have to have stuff that is much more defensible, much more ground truth, and being able to do so. So if this group comes forward and sees that there's some things that they want looked at for our comp plan, it's perfectly okay to sit there and say, staff, please convey that over to the planning and development services staff. I also want to point out what we have done at the county level in regards to some of our more antiquated data. And wetlands are a prime example. When we developed our future land use maps in 1990, we did not have near the technology and accuracy that we have today. So those were based on, old infrared maps, basically, and crayons were basically the lines that were established. So we did put in the comprehensive plan that you could ground truth it based on specific data available there. So again, as we go through this, there are ways that we, from a staff perspective, can implement the overall goal through our comp plan, then put into the regulations. For example, if there's better data. When I was hearing the South Florida Water Management District was objecting because of certain elevations on some of the control structures. There you go. You have your standard. And if someone can come in and say, you've got to have a control structure set at 6, when Reliance at 6.5, so therefore we've got a half foot of storage in this area, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are ways that we can work through it. Just want to make sure, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and realize there may be a way to adapt some of the information.
great, thank you very much. That's exactly what I hope to hear. Tyler and Tom, Tyler and I think John and Tom is up for it.
Sure. So start by saying, yes, there's ways we can increase the design storm just by changing. Right now, we use a 2524 or 2596 or 124 as kind of our standard design storms, depending on whether you're getting St. John's or Volusia County as your agency. For that, they get up to about 12 inches of rain. We could say that we're going to use a 1,000-year storm event. I mean, that's on the table. It's just the threshold of where we want to decide to be. So that it's not the main reason to talk. As I understand, the county's got flood studies that are getting started that would effectively be the further refinement of modeling, the H&H type of modeling that would give us a pretty fine resolution of detail on where our flood areas are. It would allow us to establish those flood map changes. I imagine the council, with that information, would recommend that we apply to change the FEMA maps so that it requires those folks to buy flood insurance. They're protected in these events, so on and so forth. So I kind of feel like the ball is somewhat rolling on this path to do a lot of what's being discussed from a modeling side. I think that, there was a pretty good point that maybe we need to ask NOAA, like, are they in process of making an update? If they haven't updated for over 10 years, maybe there's something that's pending and we just don't know. I don't know anybody at NOAA to reach out to myself, but
Sure.
yeah, but that might be something that is worth us kind of keeping a pulse on as group of folks. In terms of modeling for different storm events, duration is a big factor that comes in here. And I can say, like, I was running stormwater models this morning, so I just plugged in some different storm events. It's a project in Leesburg, won't be coming to anybody here. And I had 25-foot moorings. We never encountered a confining layer, didn't encounter water table, did not encounter any markers of water table in this 25-foot moorings. The geotech said estimated at 10 feet below grade. I can make my pond tiny. I can make it almost useless because water just goes in the ground so fast on that project. And so it's one of those things where I'm following my own rules that I suggest here and trying to make sure that, I account for graceful failure and other things in case it silts up or otherwise. But we run into these challenges, and the right way for me as an engineer to be more comfortable isn't just to throw 30 inches of rain at it, because I can actually make it handle that. It's to have that regional flood study. So from my professional perspective, what is already not on the ground yet, but already in process of being developed, as I understand it, got the approval from council, right, at the last council meeting. Direction to move forward. I thought they were given direction to
Yes.
conduct the flood study. So if we have these things that are already going on, then I think it's a little bit of a, hey, we don't necessarily need to keep telling them that they need to do this. We just need to say, hey, we want these results, and we want to make sure that when these results come in, they're put to good use. All I have.
Thank you, John and Tom.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. One on the modeling results map here. How updated are those? Does that include Milton? And what's the time span on those models?
So those don't model specific hurricanes. It's more looking at that 20 round 100-year rain event into those future change factors.
So you're not taking the extremes into,
No, but with the amount of rainfall, it does hit close to those extreme numbers. So we have been using that to keep sea levels.
okay.
And we have sort of EM folks from around our region, and where they've seen flooding that they've never seen before in person, we have seen the model pick up a lot of those areas.
Okay. And then is there a public website that we can look at data that you all are developing and modeling?
That is in progress. However, the data is done, and we can pass it to the county and you guys to utilize it as hoping to have it up online in the next month or two, all those stuff. But other kind of projects, getting that.
We're also working on resilience. Right where it is, portal, maybe for lack of a better word, public facing our GIS tool that'll have like all of the information from our resilience and planning. So our vulnerability assessment that the Regional Planning Council did, and any other publicly available data that we have. So anybody will be able to go on there, look at our regional resilience action plan, look at where projects are, look at predictions of storm surge, look at predictions of vulnerability based on the vulnerability system. So we're in the middle of doing that right now. It'll be, maybe a month or two before it's ready, but then that should be a really useful tool. And then when this rainfall data is allowed to be published, we can also have that.
And then my last question is, I would assume with all this data that we're collecting and gathering, and especially what the work that y'all are doing, our basin study that we're doing in Volusia County, is that inclusive to this data as well?
Probably a Tad question. Do you know what the scopes are for the basin studies, and are they going to include some of this work that's being done around the state, like future rainfall, et cetera?
The scopes have not been formalized yet, that will be done as a part of bringing on a particular consultant for that particular basin. In terms of the storms that are going to be run, I would assume that they would go ahead, based on discussions I've had with Ben Bartlett about the situation. It's going to be running 124, and then also running either an EM event or a Hilton size event, just to give us a.
So I guess the reason I asked that is that are they going to G and haul with these maps and these flood areas versus your basin studies? Are they going to line up? Or are we going to have two sets of data?
No, they're not.
One's different level of this is a different level, and then you're in the position of, well, who do you believe?
Yeah.
So,
Or they're using two different storms. By what I understand of his description, they're using 100-year 24 that's been modified based on whatever they did to modify it. And they're projecting it in 2040. We're basing everything on the current size 100-year 24-hour storm and today's conditions.
On one hand,
So they're not apples to apples.
so their 100-year storm's different than your 100-year.
That's what I understood. And we're projecting it. They've basically gone back through and I mean, that's part of what they're looking at is identifying what amount of inches for a 100-year 24-hour. We've got the NOAA data, which basically says in DeLand, for example, it's 11.3. And they're modifying it and saying, looking at, I don't know what they used to modify it, they came up with a modification to it that added, either they added 12 inches or it was 12 inches, I don't know which, but, so, not,
Well, I guess to me then, how do we make the rational decision? If we're getting all the different sets of data.
right, well, that's why Tyler was recommending, instead of adopting, appreciating and understanding what their study is saying,
Right,
and not necessarily arguing with it, assuming that it's good. That instead of saying, okay, adopt their 124-hour, which says 15 inches, just throwing a number out there. He's saying, look, we should take a look at what a 15-inch storm equivalent is, 100-year, 72-hour storm. Again, 15 inches is the important factor of the amount of, or for the monitoring purposes, and just use that. And then that way you do have a marrying of the two, so to speak, just a different way to skin the cat to get back to that same location. And then this way you don't have to get into an argument about whether or not what they projected for the 100-year 24-hour is actually correct. So there's a lot that goes into it. And
well,
that's why he's saying we're potentially at risk if we go out there and say, use their 124 hours, she doesn't agree with anybody else's 124 hour.
right.
And then engineers developers start suing us for putting us in. By going back and cheating, so to speak, and using the right size storm or that size storm.
Sure. You answered the question. Thank you.
One thing I do want to add about all the different models, everyone who models something, the results are going to be different, but I think with all of them, the more you have at your disposal, the better, because some models might pick up something where others don't. So essentially, all of these models are just another tool in the toolbox when we're going to use these policies.
Thank you, Bill, and Wendy, then Michelle.
yeah, so, what he's doing is modeling the 100-year flood event in 2040 and 2070, right? So more extreme rainfall events is what I'm understanding. And then Tad, you guys are going to do a flood study, basin study?
Well, we're gonna do a modeling study on a much smaller scale than what they're approaching. Not loud enough. I can do it. Tom hasn't asked for anything.
The online listeners.
They can hear it too. But,
So what you're doing is,
we're basing it all on the existing storm. So we're taking models, we're using basically the same LiDAR for the most part. If we have more specific information at like tailwater locations like bridge culverts or, pipes or any of those that we have the benefit of, then we would plug that information in. So ours will be a little bit better along smaller detailed sections. But when you're looking at the scale we're talking about, it won't make that big a difference between theirs and ours in that regard. It's just basically the size storm and the different storms we're applying. I'm assuming that they've looked at the 10, 25, and 100, which is what they had displayed. I don't know if they've looked at anything more. We're going to be just looking at the 124, like I said, the extreme condition based on Ian or Nicole or Ian or Milton, based on which side of the county you were on. And then we're also going to actually run another set, at least on one basin, because there's been a lot of question about whether or not development creates a different flooding condition, much like New Smyrna Beach, when they had their consultant take a look at it, indicated that there was no appreciable change over the entire city length for flooding. So we're going to go ahead and do that same concept where we take out any development that's occurred in a last 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know what the cycle is going to be. They'll have to determine that. But that way we'll get a better answer as to how much development's actually had an effect on a particular basin.
Okay, so then my understanding is that, you will, when you, model the extreme ones like Ian, you're gonna be looking at basically that 2070, because that's about how much rain we got in Ian. So they will be comparable in some way, I would think, right? Am I thinking that?
I'm thinking the way.
Yeah.
So we must be right.
Wendy's next, but Clay, you have your,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's all right. Wendy and then pause again.
Well, so yes, the modeling for Ian, the modeling that we're gonna do for Ian will, you would hope, match up with what Josh has done here. I guess more philosophically, should you be planning for the future or planning for the past? Right? And so we cannot assume, and Josh back me up here, we cannot assume that the rainfall events that we're experiencing now represent the rainfall events that we will have in the future. We are living in a climate altered reality. And so we can't just say, oh, it's going to be an extreme event. Ian and Milton will no longer be extreme events. They will be 100-year events, which are not extreme. And so we need to be planning, we need to be setting policy based on models that are based in science. I mean, you didn't just make this stuff up. I mean, this is based in science. And so we should be planning for scientific projections of the future.
Which is an excellent segue because we, ENRAC, through this representative, were asked at the meeting yesterday, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen to a future council, what we've been going through with citizens coming in and being upset. It's 2:00. We have quite a bit, it's more people to hear from. We have quite a bit of ground to cover and a discussion of the meeting yesterday. Does anybody have any additional questions at this time? More discussion on what we've learned thus far? Just keep things moving along.
I'm just assuming the presentation will get posted.
Yes.
Thank you so very, very much. And we'd love it if you stay, but I don't know if you plan to.
I'm to go meet with GIS right now, passing the VA data. So I'll be in the account.
Very expensive data right here.
Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing with us and answering our questions. Much appreciated.
And my email's in the presentation, so if you guys have any other questions after, definitely feel free to reach out. Or if you want to see some of the model results, we pull those up on an app and go and take them to the further. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, which I don't have in front of me, is, I believe, the discussion of the January 14th meeting and then the direction we received yesterday at the council meeting. We presented our annual report and our work plan. I guess I would like to kick it off just by a show of hands. How many people watched the entire January 14th, except for maybe all the public comments? I quit at 8:30 at night. Okay, so there's a passel of us that attended that meeting virtually or otherwise. Who, Vice Chair, would you like to kick off comments on what you observed and heard and saw?
Sure. So it was a long night. I think I was speaker 87 of 90 or something. So I think it was a good discussion. We've heard, I think, a lot of the points that were raised, but I think there was a focus on being solution oriented by all of the speakers, no matter what kind of sector they were from. I think that I'm going to jump to the end result of the council discussion, which is a little bit of, we've got some things in the works. But I think they have a work plan put together with some critical thoughts that they'd like to explore moving forward, that Councilmember Kent put in his motion. And I think that, you know, some of those large picture items are topics that we've talked about before, but I think that need a lot of technical insight. And so, you know, some of them maintain and improve all of our drainage canals and facilities, great. When they mention creek systems, that's great, because those are natural water bodies we can't maintain. No impacts to wetlands, you know, talking about avoidance and minimization and where that impacts and what, you know, level we want there. I think he said no fill in any development, which was excluded because Santiago said he wasn't sure about the legal.
There were two separate motions. First, the 6 items identified by Councilmember Kang, which were no impact to wetlands, no use of wetland mitigation banks. Then again, also a separate discussion was the proliferation of multifamily along Williamson and other areas. Also looking at the use of county-owned land to help with stormwater improvements, maintenance of canals and ditches, and purchase of lands for flood mitigation.
Which is in our legislative priorities anyway. We're asking to have that grant process streamlined.
And so we're right now pulling that together. It's not a final product, it's just going to be an update provided to account and realizing that there's some additional research that needs to be done.
That was one motion, and there was another one?
Second motion was proposed by the chair and it passed as well, which was restricting filling of sites for development. So in other words, I have 100 acres, I want to put on some homes there, I'm going to bring in 3 to 4 feet of fill onto the property, how can we agree that will occur?
And I think that was what the motion that was passed, if I can clarify a little, was for staff to bring back whether or not we can do that.
Correct.
Not a proposal to do that. Right.
Correct. And, you know, just from a staff perspective, a lot of the things that you've identified as part of your LID ordinance actually addresses that issue.
I'd like to add to Jessica's report too, that the temperature in the room seemed to be much lower because there was actual discussion about solutions going on. And the people that are so upset and so afflicted were so great. It really moved me. And I was just watching it on my tablet screen and it was heartwarming that we had taken our work so seriously, and for which I thank all of you. The other thing that was interesting in that meeting that I hadn't heard at any other meeting was the recognition that we all know that flooding can come from, that there are many reasons that we experience flooding and that it is very site specific and that we need many tools in our toolkit to deal with that. Because that recognition, I had not heard from the council before. I don't know if anyone else did, but it was missing in action in my view. So that was a really, take it and run with it. Wendy?
I agree. I sat through the whole meeting in person to the very last minute. And I agree that it was a much more solutions focused meeting. And I mean, there's been some critique of it after the fact. Oh, they kicked the can down the road once again and whatever. But I felt like there was good progress made. I really did appreciate Councilman Kent coming in with a set of solutions that could then be sort of, bandied around. I think Chairman Brower was, he kept saying the phrase drain and fill, which I had suggested to him earlier in the day was maybe not what he meant to say. Fill and build, I think, is something that we like to harp on, but, draining is about draining wetlands. We don't really drain floodplains, we drain wetlands, and we treat floodplains and wetlands differently in the ordinance, which is a different question whether we should or not, but it's like, okay, well, if we're going to protect wetlands, then we've already covered the don't drain part of his concern. and then you have to have this conversation about what it is we are filling and why we are filling things. And, of course, part of the stormwater ordinance we've got going forward is to add 6 more inches of fill, which of course I questioned and challenged when we brought that up at the time. So anyway, I thought it ended on a good note, as they have done so many times in the past. They are putting an awful lot of faith in what we are bringing forward next week. And, and I feel a little anxious about that because I don't feel like what we're bringing forward is, A, it's not complete, and B, it's not enough. And so I have a question to staff or to legal or, whoever can answer it. We are an advisory committee, and even PLDRC in reviewing the ordinance is serving in an advisory capacity. Just because we have written or staff has written on our behalf ordinance language, does the council have to adopt it as written? Or are they the legislative body and they can change it as they see fit? That is my understanding. And yet, Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody asked that question. It might have been Councilman Johansson asked this question during the January 14th meeting, where he said, are we going to be able to, are we going to be able to make changes in what's being brought forward? I think it was it was Paolo who said, it depends on how it is noticed.
Let me clarify,
Okay.
it's pertaining to the actual ordinance, because when we advertise a ordinance for a public hearing, we have to use the heading that is of that ordinance. So if they deviate from anything in there, they can act that. They can say, staff, we want to add X, Y, and Z. We just can't act on it at that meeting. We would have to be at the next meeting so they can modify the ordinance to properly notice it.
Okay, but it's gonna have to have 2 readings anyway, right?
Right. Well,
the same thing.
again,
It's not just,
so
okay,
these would require 2 readings. Not all ordinances at a county level require 2 readings. These changes would require 2 readings, and I'm speaking for the director, so stop me assuming.
Showing my banks, yeah.
And so the fact is that the county council, and let's just talk about what's coming on February 11th. We've got 3 specific items. The changes to the stormwater that TAD has helped navigate through this body and through the PLDRC, as well as the comp plan amendments to and the ordinance changes for the voluntary LID standards. If they change any one of those 3 substantially, they would not be able to act on the ordinance. They would have to re-advertise it and at the next meeting, take action. So for the comp plan, it adds another little bit of time because we have to transmit those to the Florida Department of Commerce for review and department under the Community Planning Act. It doesn't stop it from occurring, it just tacks on another 30 days for them.
okay, and thank you for clarifying, because that was really my point, is that I got a sense from the January 14th meeting that they want ordinances with some teeth. And are they going to be allowed, maybe with, a delay in getting it approved, to maybe take the voluntary LID ordinance that, is moving through the pipeline right now and upgrade it back to hybrid, which is what we as a body originally wanted and recommended, but then of course, we've gone over this a million times, would it be useful for us today to say, we still believe that the hybrid approach is best as a body and, and kind of encourage them to take that extra 30 days?
Yes,
I'm pardon for interrupting. The one thing that staff is going to say, just so you all understand, is that right now you have a bird in the hand. So adopt what you can right now. And if there are specific changes that you want done, tell us so we can come back and get those going. Because unless they have very specific standards that are going to be ready to go at the next meeting, that could just send us back into, and please don't take this the wrong way, an extensive discussion here. extensive discussion at the Planning and Land Development Regulation Commission. And while that's happening, all the work that this group has already done for the voluntary work, and all this work that's been done for the stormwater changes is going to sit there and languish. I would say that from our from staff's perspective, take what you got, get that in place, and tell us what you want changed, so we can come back and bring it to you in the format that you would like. And again, that's, where we're going to be heading.
I want to jump a little bit to yesterday's meeting. I spoke on our behalf for the work plan and for the annual report. And I reminded them that our original recommendation for low impact development had been hybrid. I didn't share with them that the reason for that was because we were told by our external advisors, by the consultants, that a hybrid approach had, that if you didn't have some mandatory aspect, it wouldn't happen. But I did say that that was coming back. They did ask about, and I want to level set for all of us for stormwater. Just tell me if I'm misremembering something. We agreed as a body that we needed to send them a bird in the hand now, that we needed to get that done for all kinds of reasons, including public sentiment. But we also recognized that we needed to have this meeting that we're having today, and we needed to hear outside voices, because maybe we go back and say, you know what, we do need to put more teeth into that. But we already kind of said as a group that we were going to go the bird in the hand way. I hope there is appetite for strengthening. There was, to me, a great change in the way the conversation went on the 14th. And yesterday, the only question that I received was from Member Santiago, but it was about an LID. And I also surfaced in that back and forth with him that when he said, we don't want this to happen to a future council. In other words, are you sure that you set the standards high enough? And it kind of indicated that nobody has a crystal ball, but that it sort of depended. What we struggle with is whether we believe that storms like Ian and Milton are anomalies, or we believe that they're the new normal. And I said, I personally believe it's the new normal. That's what I would take into consideration. And the last thing that I said to them, and then Jessica gave some very good remarks that I hope we also get to, was that we are not about the past. There may be tools in the toolkits we've talked about, things in LID that can deal with flooding from older development, but really we are focused on the future, doing ordinances and speaking to the council through those ordinances. So we can't go back. We don't have a time machine to go back and fix causes of flooding now, because that has also not been consistently clear in meetings and in what the public's understanding is. So those are the things that I remember and that I'm thinking of, and just thought I'd share, and what happened yesterday. And our work plan was approved. I was a little surprised that Member Kent didn't move stormwater, wetland up in the, but they approved it. Jessica.
Yeah, just to add briefly to that discussion, because I do think it weighs in, is that the additional commentary, other than reiterating that looking at land development codes is looking into the future rather than the existing problems, is a reminder to the council that this body is directed by our enabling ordinance and the policy direction we get from council. And reminded them again that if they would like to change that policy direction or give us additional insight, we would be happy to hear it and work with it. There was none additional given. So take that as it was. It was a long meeting for a morning meeting with a short agenda. But I think that when we're looking at what's coming forward, part of the discussion does have to be, the LID structure was brought forward under this circumstance. We think having it in place is great. It might have, some projects move through. And if you direct us to come back and structure a hybrid program, we will. The same thing with stormwater. We've got some updates that we think make sense. They've gone through our review. If we want to do more, we will. Direct us to do so, and we can open it up and make it broader, or whatever we're going to end up doing. So I think that that has to be. I can sense the fear that we bring this forward and council adopts it and says we handled it, which is not, I think, what this board thinks that we are doing and those actions. So just having that out there and the rhetoric is important.
And just to add, I also said that when we developed our priorities, it was prior to the January 14th meeting, so we had that input, which was significantly different from all the other meetings we listened to. And as Jessica says, both of us stated a complete willingness for them to direct us with different priorities or stricter priorities, that we work for them as an extension of their home rule responsibility to protect the environment. And then Tyler, and then Bill. Ginger, read.
Okay. Claim that was spoken like a true person. The person has truly had to address the body politic many, many times. It's important that we look at it from their perspective also. These are politicians. They are subject to influences and forces we can't begin to understand. And they would like to see results that they can actually hold up to the public and say, see, we are doing something. And we also need to understand that whatever we do now is also subject to change. These codes and these rules, it's organic. It never stays the same. So I'm very sure that they will also tell these commissioners, council people, the same thing. This is not the end of our work. There is more to do. Thank you.
So first I want to say, Clay, I thought you did a great job. I thought Dan also did a great job of presenting the information that you guys presented. You had a substantial amount of data to put forward, and listening. I thought that you guys did a good job of setting the playing field at the beginning of that conversation pretty fairly. Listening to the public, one of the things that I observed January 14th versus the prior meetings was there were a lot more people against the moratorium from the public side. It wasn't just the people that were complaining about issues. There was I'm going to call it silent large group. I don't want to say majority, it could be a minority, but there was a large group of people that had previously been silent that came out of the woodwork. When we talk about LID to me feels like an omnibus spending bill. It feels like we're taking all of these things and shoving them together and saying that they're all good. And I fully disagree with it. I've been one of the quietly outspoken opponents to LID from the beginning on this committee. And as I hear more of it, it is one of those things that it's like tinnitus in my ear. It's just getting louder and giving me a headache. So there are things that LID encourages that are good practices. There are things that it encourages that aren't going to at all solve the problem with flooding. There are things that it mandates that don't have anything to do with flooding. And so I think the idea that we treat the solution to this problem as an omnibus spending bill is shortchanging the public. And I also hear members of the public tell me LID is the answer, because they've heard it from everybody that LID is the answer. I hear the county council members say LID is the answer. There is a subdivision in the land, I'm not going to pick on, but the engineer that designed it used full LID within the development of that subdivision. And I've heard all of those same people complain about that subdivision as an example of what's wrong, because there's towers of dirt and clear cutting and everything else with it. So as an engineer, I don't really like it when we have disingenuous communication to the public, which is what I feel like that conversation is. And one of the things that I'm going to suggest is pay attention to the silence of engineers on the support side of LID. There's not very many of us that you see advocating for LID as our solution to these problems. We're advocating for flood studies, for specific flood-related actions, for buyouts of recurrent flooded properties, for things that are solution-oriented. LID, therefore, there's somebody pushing it, and I've said in the past that there are a lot of companies that develop filter technologies, rain garden technologies, specific soil augmentations, landscape maintenance plans, so on and so forth. Those companies are funding the studies that support LID. It is going to simply make things more expensive. It is not going to wholesale make things better. Most of the time that an LID stormwater technique is better than the traditional stormwater techniques that we use is in redevelopment or in a constrained basin area where the original standard that we would use upon a lake, whatever, is not available. There's not space or the geology to support it. So in support of let's move forward with what we have strongly, I feel that we should, because you're going to find that myself and a whole bunch of other people are going to come and speak out against the strengthening of what we've already done. And I think what we have is a pretty good compromise point for us to move forward with. I think further conversation is something that's going to happen. But I do want to throw that out there because I think that there's been a silence around this, and there's more people that are in my ear agreeing with me on that than you guys may realize.
So just mechanically, when it goes to the council, it will be as we suggested it, but the PLDRC comments of making it hybrid and taking away the incentives will just be a suggestion to the council?
The agenda has all of this, basically. What work with the consultant, the grant, the recommendation that you've all made, the council's ultimate determination to make it entirely voluntary up through the PLDRC's recommendation. But the material itself, the ordinance, the manual, the complement amendment, all remain the way that they were before PLDRC with the total voluntary approach. The staff has not made any changes based on the PLDRC recommendation. But we will inform the council that there are these other things, and I plan to, I'll let them know what the original ENRAC recommendation was. Just the facts, right, the history. This is what ENRAC recommended, this is what you all ultimately did, what's happened since. And then there are options, really for them to do nothing, adopt it the way that it is, adopt it with the PLDRC recommendations, or they have several options that are laid out in that agenda, which I think might be going out public today.
That's the goal.
So.
Okay, I got a second question on the stormwater, to you, Jessica. The V-Guard comments that were supposed to come to ENRAC, there was a sheet Chris sent to me saying, can you take it to ENRAC? Did they already get that months ago?
So there are a lot of stormwater things happening right now. I know that, this is my V-Card hat. I know that V-Card sent formal letters on stormwater updates to the city of New Smyrna Beach. And I know that we sent initial comments to the county prior to pulling in the latest revisions. So I would have to check, Bill, on who it went to, but I think it was shared prior.
And for LID, the official V-Card letter is in the agenda packet, which is basically we support this as written. I don't know the answer to that on this stormwater. Now, do you know, is there a V-Card letter in stormwater agenda? I can't remember.
I'm not aware of this.
Okay.
I will check.
I'd just like to mention, I'm glad you try to read the tea leaves of the public. I do too. It matters to me. In a letter I sent in personal capacity before January 14th council meeting, I urged them to look at the various causes and potential solutions for flooding, precisely because if the public doesn't have any understanding that it is a variety of things, they will not be able to participate in solutions. And I said yesterday on the dais, there's no magic bullet. There's no one magic bullet for this, because there isn't. I don't think, it certainly hasn't occurred to me that LID is the one magic bullet either. To me, it's a series of tools that can be applied very well, and many of which I'd like to see utilized and applied. And I'll even harken back to a V-Card meeting where I met Jessica, I met you, and I met Bill before this body had even been reconstituted. And we discussed the things in the ordinances that prevented the adoption of certain things that were LID practices that we agreed would be good practices to employ. So I just, my hope is fine, everyone should speak out about what they believe in and what they care about. And I think we've been forthcoming in this meeting with one another. And if we haven't, I encourage us to be, certainly. But I also think we have, we are more on the same page than we are not. And I would urge us to try to keep us on the same page. I understand that there are things that trigger all of us. But LID isn't just one thing either. And as Ginger just brought up, it's going to them as purely volunteer.
Just to clarify, there is a January 22nd, 2025 memo from VCAR. Regarding the technical review on boring determined the methodology for borings, the impact of increased fill requirements, a variety of other items. So that is included in the packet for February 11th meeting. Thank you.
And I looked up to it just to summarize it. It's basically just let's independently verify this. Let's do a burn stability analysis. It's nothing hugely different than what's proposed to the clarification.
There's big formulas, got it.
I know there's none in there. Please right past that with my attorney and I was going.
And it's square root of that.
Swap. Get out that, what is it, slide rules? Wendy,
Jessica, can you clarify the letter from VCAR about the LID portion of the ordinance? They were saying that they supported as is, even though the sort of summary page that we discussed last time says that they support a hybrid approach.
The continued statement of VCARD is that we support the adoption of a voluntary system. And we have recommended review of a hybrid system, but that what is currently drafted cannot be easily converted to a hybrid system. That it would require a whole new kind of review drafting this scheme. And so we can't at this time say, and we'd support this being hybrid, because as it's written, we can't say that. So it would have to be re-reviewed and analyzed. Okay.
Ginger,
What else would say? So, we anticipated at the meeting yesterday that the council would change their priorities because of the conversation on January 14th. They did not, in fact, do that. Although the memo that Clay and the legal team and Ben are putting together, I just want you to know the staff took what they said about wetlands as perhaps our best chance to get some wetland ordinance changes through that, I've been working on for 20 years. So we did take the opportunity to summarize those changes, the ones that you all already looked at and voted on, and then also proposed changes that you hadn't yet gotten to. So there will be a memo for this council where we've tried to take the whole line of forms and say, hey, you said you didn't want wetland impacts. Here's some suggestions for how to do that, right? How to talk about there are unavoidable impacts, not no wetland impacts ever from here on out, right? So just so you know, we took that opportunity. We tried very hard to make sure we were clear about which things ENRAC had already voted on and approved versus suggested changes that you hadn't yet approved because we didn't want to misrepresent your work. So long-winded way of saying, we are going to address what the council said, and that may trigger an opportunity to get the wetland stuff done sooner. And we'd have to talk about whether we want that, because we're more than halfway done, maybe with the wetlands, and maybe this is an opportunity to, bang the rest of it out and get something done. So just want to throw that out there for consideration. It may be our best chance. So, but they did not change the work plan in any way. So.
thank you. Clay, do you have?
Done.
Okay, Tom, and then I suggest we do our 7th inning stretch.
Out of what I've heard the last few minutes, well, whether Clay knows it or not, or whether he's even conscious of it, planning directors, they will lean towards preparing staff reports and agenda memos in a direction they think that the council and commission wants them to go. So you know it's true. Certain words, phrases, dialectics, you can make them lean one way or another. There are people in this council right now that probably don't really know what they want, but they want something. They want results. And so I would implore you, Clay, when you do these unconscious activities and you use certain words and phrases and buzzwords, use the ones that would get us to a place where they can actually hold up their head and say, look what we've done here. I'm speaking like a politician that's had to listen to these presentations and as a planning director who has had to write these presentations. Thanks.
Okay, is everybody open to a 5 to 10 minute break?
So move.
Say thank you.
Oh, yeah. Great.
You,
Yeah, I do want to.
I was way too slow to get that. Me too.
Yeah, it's fine.
Fun stuff.
I started to like, Mom, kid.
Yes, I'm like.
It took me down.
This is the thing, I feel like every day is from, and I said to you have to understand, I said, tell me others. Each county facilities like cancer.
Yeah.
Facilities. Five years on the state level.
Yeah.
In those. Yeah, got it. So. The option of it is.
All right. Yeah, well,
Well, I don't know what you probably say either. I would speak for myself. Yeah. Interesting.
yeah, you can just jump out there and you can see right there.
Yeah.
Just can see the stairs. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I'm sort of saying. So they can't.
Yeah, so if this is possible, that's very smart.
And then he has this. Also bring in, but the unsolicited. All of it. I just. Except first of all, none of them has listened. They just said. And I'm saying.
Jared told me to make sure we're nice to you guys. It's no worries, we'll try. It's fine. If you sit through it, it's the only thing.
Police closes at $60 million approved in expenditures. Thank you for something. That's. Then the agreement requires that they develop own or maybe what's right. So it's going to be next. You know what comes. There's two of them.
I will.
Initial.
Oh, that's a picture question. Yeah, that's a carnivorous.
Yeah, okay, so we found this right now, track down, so here we can write ATVs and all of us.
No, it's called.
I think that's about 2 years, and it's frostbit, backlit, free. What I need to give to juice.
Put this out there, that's all that. It's probably those clouds that are and world journal. So that's why it's because it gets its nutrients from the.
So, yeah, we're keeping it on the pool deck, so it's got good mosquitoes and stuff there. We have a mosquito problem with our pool deck, and we keep it in the water, but I don't know what she has in her soil.
Right.
At the bottom, so,
Right.
so it'll actually be better in a, just a pure. I mean, my yard is pure sand, so that's no problem.
It's, no,
So I need to replace
high ground water.
Yeah, we've got a different. Training.
I might be stealing my
It's-
question for us.
We saw it, like, I think that's never, I didn't know what actually was, and it's one of those things where it's gonna get killed, and I don't think we were supposed to take it, but it's gonna die, so.
That would only be protected by landowners, you know. That's not protected like. You can't.
Well,
Around.
we could all, just like, this is the place. There's guys, I saw a dump truck and an excavator, digging out the side of the soil. The sites in the plumb. And it's like lots of stuff like that. You know, I like them out here to buy, and then people are dying through the stuff and they're gonna so they're gonna get us in trouble and offer to build an excavator. Like,
Shit, really.
well,
If somebody from the St. John's.
I've seen multiple FWC trucks out there in the years. I've seen a sheriff truck all the time, and it was following a 6x6 fire truck. It was somebody ripped through side by side and half a tree. And that had and they were like 2 hours from the gate by that vehicle. It was one of those, you don't wanna hurt yourself in certain places. So if you do, you better look at the insurance that has everything.
Don't get caught. St. John's.
I don't know, like that's 3 acres. CFX, very interesting. It's actually CFX has an expressway lane right across my lot, right, you know, it's beautiful. So my $900 lot, I think I can sell for $10,000 to CFX. I'll be a 4-wheeler.
He's brilliant. And he's a game worker. A big. He was going. The only excuse in the house, but so here, and he was working 5 days.
That's.
UCF, why they changed.
He didn't see on there.
Okay, let's see if you remember.
He's new kids coming out. All, back when the last grade was in the light sandwich.
Yeah.
We have a birth.
It's right still right from school.
Why did it say just printers? And so they just continue to give work on their station. Telling me. So you really.
He and I spent the largest Saturdays. He offered us beds, take the street, and drive. When you're done.
Which I think would be. Why aren't we looking?
Two kids. So when and then because you don't care. Yes.
Calling the meeting to order once again. Thank you very much. Ginger?
Okay, well, so the first item under new business, is just a little discussion about how, chapter 50 changes might occur. Just sort of as a reminder. So we've got the stormwater changes to chapter 72 going to council next week. We talked about that. You said we're gonna still want to address chapter 50. And so this meeting is just the beginning of that. But typically what happens when we when we propose changes to the minimum standards is that there's an extended public review period. We will have to send out any proposed changes to all of the cities, allow them an opportunity to comment, complain, cheer, whatever they might do. My experience is usually not the cheering, but so it takes a little while longer. So just sort of an FYI, in terms of how this committee would work, it's not really any different. You'd be looking at those standards, talking with experts, which in this case is going to be Tad and Ben, and deciding where you think we should go as a countywide minimum standard. There's just that extra procedural step of getting the comments from the cities. My suggestion would be that once those comments come in from the cities, that the staff collate those, collect them, and provide them to you all for their sort of review about what you think about the comments that come in, right? And whether or not that changes what you want to recommend. So that's really all I wanted to say there. It's just to, as we're going through, think about the fact that there's going to be that extra review when it's a minimum standard. So that was it. Questions, comments, whatever.
Bill,
So do you think that you will draft the changes, show them to us, and then we'll debate them, and then they'll go to the cities, or will they go to the cities first and then we'll come back and review them?
No, the way I envision it is that just like we've been doing, you all make recommendations on ordinance changes. It wouldn't be me necessarily drafting. In this case, it would be the public works folks and legal. But what would go to the cities would be a revised version of the ordinance, right? Not just conceptual. So you would all look at that, make your recommendations, that would get drafted into ordinance form and it would go out.
Thanks. How is that presented to the cities?
It's been quite some time since we've done a chapter 50 minimum standard change. The last time we did it was a change to the waterwise landscaping ordinance, and that just went out from me as an email to the city manager and but the highest elected official, so typically the mayor, whatever, in each city. With the material, an explanation, and we welcome your comments, please let us know whatever it takes. That was a really easy one. So there wasn't really any controversy. What we have done in the past where we were trying to make minimum standard changes to things that were maybe a little more controversial, we actually offered to meet with each city and explain what the proposed changes are. We have in the past used VCard as sort of a partner to get together with folks from different municipalities to do a presentation and make it to a group. So, I don't know exactly how this one would work. My guess is that we would offer to meet with each city, whoever from their city wants to hear a presentation, and anybody that wants to do that, then we would go.
Yeah. Okay. Let me kind of add to that. We no longer have the League of Cities as an operating group, but we do have the mayor's group at a meeting. And so the roundtable elected officials, they have established a committee that is committed to flooding and stormwater issues. I believe what will happen is once this group has been able to work through and identify the specific changes they're seeking in chapter 50, and then we have confirmation that that is what we're going to be going with, that group will be engaged before we finalize it and send it to the council. Right, so in other words, you can go there and kind of as a preamble, if you will, and then you go city by city with specific folks.
Right. At the heart of it, remember, these are countywide standards that are established under the charter. And the whole point is to allow for the cities that would be impacted by it to provide us comments.
Right.
There will be a part of the statement of Fisher have made situation where the county council feels that we have the appropriate standards, even though there may be some objections and we can go proceed.
Right. Well, my main point was just that it's not going to be a surprise. I mean, it's something to be built up to, dealt with, and then dealt with further. I mean, there's some salesmanship in this involved, and at the same time, they want to show action against this problem. So I think it's in a good position. I just don't want to blow it on the mechanics, you know?
Agreed.
Okay, all right, so next on the agenda is a discussion of the stormwater standards throughout the county and in other counties. So at the last meeting, you asked for this information to help you in your deliberations in chapter 50. So what we did is hire the firm Kenley Horn to compare the county's ordinance of minimum standard and implementing ordinance to the jurisdictions within the county and to some other counties. I will apologize in advance that you did not get this information ahead of time. It was a significant amount of information to go through and we didn't vet it all in time to get it out to you. So I have printed copies of two matrices, one which is the comparison with the county with other counties and one that is the county and the cities. I'm going to preface that by saying the city matrix is still in a little bit rougher draft format than the county one. Tad really went through the county one with the county home, and that's probably in about its final iteration. The city one is maybe a little more rough. I printed them because we didn't get them to you in advance. We certainly don't expect that you will have, the ability to glean all of the information and print a copy that I'm going to hand you right now. That was the best we could do in the time that we had. So with that sort of preface, Eliza Giuliano with Kimberly Horn is going to give you a brief presentation of the work that they did. And I think that the homework will be to then digest these matrices, which I will email, right? So you will only have the printed copy. And have a more detailed discussion about any of the technical standards that are in there. And I'll go ahead and steal a little bit of thunder. Kimberly Moore isn't going to be the expert in answering technical questions. Tad is our technical expert, so he is here in fact, real specific stormwater engineering type. So I'm going to hand it over to Eliza, and I'm going to pass out the few documents that I have. And sorry, I didn't get them before now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eliza Giuliano. I'm an urban planner. We, along with Jesse Stokes, also from Kimberly Horn, have been supporting the planning department on a variety of planning reviews for last portion of the year. Yeah. So we were asked to jump in on this to do some code comparisons. As Ginger stated, I am not the engineering expert. We did call it, I did phone a friend to make sure that this PowerPoint reflected things that made sense from an engineering standpoint, but the hardcore engineering questions, as Ginger mentioned, goes to the staff. So the criteria that we were asked to pull from these different codes were volume of retention, design storm, projected rainfall, pond design, and maintenance requirements. We looked at all the jurisdictions in Volusia County. The only one that sticks out here a little bit is that New Smyrna Beach is actually looking at some revisions to their ordinance, and we're aware of that, so we included both versions, both the adopted and proposed changes. And then we identified counties across the state to some extent, as well as within the region, that might have standard worth comparing. I have counties that were known for having more restrictive and more innovative standards, and those are some counties that are a bit further away. And or counties that are just immediately adjacent to Volusia County. As you, it seems are well aware, there are two different types of standards within Volusia County's code. Chapter 50, which applies to all municipalities within the county, and Chapter 72, which only applies to Volusia County's unincorporated area where projects are reviewed by the county. So within this PowerPoint, we've marked with green text standards that are Chapter 50 standards that apply to everybody, and the black text is standards that are only applicable in the unincorporated area. I'm going to go through these. So this is not comprehensive. You know, you will get the matrix, which is comprehensive, but we try to pull out some of the material differences between the different jurisdictions. And I would say, you know, listening to your earlier conversation, you'll see some things in here that it's probably debatable whether it's a material difference, but whether things are calculated by the jurisdiction ahead of time, or whether they're calculated on a project basis, right? So, Volusia County in the green here is the countywide standard for 24-hour, 25-year frequency storms. We do have some jurisdictions that compare to DeBerry and Sarasota that use 100-year storm, frequency storm as their standard. We don't have an analog for this in the counties, but we pointed out the pond must work out within 72 hours. That's one of the county standards for its own projects. Again, county regulating unincorporated projects requires a half-inch of retention over the entire site. Some other jurisdictions are more restricted than that. So these jurisdictions, DeLand, Edgewater, Deltona, and Norman require 1 inch, and New Smyrna Beach, even before the revisions, requires 1.5 inches. Design storm. So Volusia County, again, this is just applicable to the unincorporated area. Requires a road facing hydrograph. If you want to know more about that, that's that for a 24-hour, 100-year storm event. Some of the other jurisdictions do call out specific numbers that describe what a 24-hour, 100-year storm event is, and that's the 10.6 inches for the area. They also have a recovery time for a closed basin of 14 days. That's stated in their code, but it's also the same as the water management district standard, so it's not necessarily different. Rainfall intensity, Volusia County, as we understand it, doesn't specifically refer to this. I will also just say, as part of this analysis, we were focused mainly on the codes. I think there's a couple instances where we looked at the engineering standards manuals, but we didn't necessarily catch all of those because that was a little bit beyond the scope of this analysis. So jurisdictional comparison, Pinellas County, they use the FDOT's model rather than specifying the rainfall intensity versus a couple of jurisdictions. New Smyrna Beach is actually proposing to add specific inches to describe the 24-hour, 25-year storms, and Brevard County already does that. And of course, those numbers are different, but that's locational. It shouldn't be the same necessarily in the percentages. Volusia County, so again, this is applicable to cities. The water table can be lowered more than 15% of the site up to 5 feet. So this has to essentially do with when the stormwater pond goes beneath the water table. So they're able to do that. That's not something that happens very often, but Volusia County does have a standard for that applies to everyone. So none of these are really one-to-one, just call out a couple of examples of standards within the comparison jurisdictions. The Volusia County code talks about slope requirements for those ponds, which is not necessarily specified in all the city codes. Polyfill calls out a maintenance berm of 10 feet. The Ormond Beach, this was the only jurisdiction that we saw that called out the need to have the pond bottom above the seasonal high water table. Again, this is pretty typical for St. John's Water Management District, but it's not necessarily unusual or different from the county.
Yes, it's 2 pages.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Jesse, that's why you see it. A couple of jurisdictions describe what the minimum pond depth is. Pinellas County has some specific standards for infiltration rates of dry ponds. Sarasota County It deals with, again, dry retention ponds, having, concrete channels in certain instances. And DeBerry, again, talks about the side slopes having maximum depth of 4 feet from the average driving grade.
I got a question. Sorry, can you go back one? So first, what does that mean on the 15% of this, can't lower the groundwater more than 15%, Tad? The Volusia County, what does that mean?
Well, what you can do to create volume sometimes in your stormwater pond, go ahead and lower that design normal water level, the seasonal high elevation that we talked about in the past. You can do that by draining those sections. So, and if you've got, keep it as a wet pond, you put your orifice at a little bit lower elevation. So what it allows that water to do is always be moving into a downstream section in advance of the storm. So you can do it on certain occasions. Generally prefer not to do that. We know that that can change, but if you're in the middle of nowhere, you're probably not going to get it. But if you're next to a canal or something like that, where the elevations in that canal are quite a bit lower, then you can possibly that excellent wetland, you wouldn't want to do it because you'll have a negative effect on the wetland. There are different things that go into that overall. They've set up a hard limit.
Okay, and then next slide, I think I had. No, I forgot. All right, thank you.
So this starts your presentation. So this, we're very near the end. So Volusia County talks about the ownership of easements to the county for maintenance. Dade County Beach is specific about requiring an easement of 15 feet for dry ponds and 10 feet for wet ponds. Port Orange requires a maintenance easement of 20 feet that's centered over pipes and structures. Okay. Different colors.
One quick point also that,
On the first page, should be the first page.
was not part of the scope of that we gave to Kimley one, but is something that this group may want to factor into. In all of the public discussions, we've heard concerns about homeowners association or property owners association that are not properly following up on that. And so one thing that y'all may want to think about as you go through this is, do you want to put in specific monitoring requirements and reporting requirements so that county staff is aware of potential lack of maintenance or other type of things that could impact the performance of stormwater ponds. Yes.
Oh, Tom. Hello. I'm off there for a second. You were hired to do a report and you did a good job. That said, I question the utility of this report. I'll give you an example. I would imagine that design considerations for Daytona Beach shores are a whole lot different than the design considerations for South DeBerry, out of St. Johns River. So some of these comparisons are apples and oranges. But they are all pretty much the same. And a lot of these rules are based on the worst possible case. Someplace like, let's say Daytona Beach, you have an ocean, but you also have a river. So it's, I just wanted to throw that out there so that we all know that putting too much value and emphasis on comparing is not really going to do us a whole lot of good. So I'm glad we don't spend too much time with this. Thank you.
Jessica.
Yeah, I think to that point, something that stood out to me is that I think the stronger standards you see, at least from the eyeball review, is along coastal areas and communities. So they have an intention standard there. But I think that in previous discussions, we've talked about, do we make a rule for the overall county? Or like we've talked about the benefit of basin studies, are there certain areas within our county where it makes sense to have a thing? Yeah.
I will mention, I think DeBerry also had, so on my side as well, DeBerry also seemed to have a pretty restrictive or extensive requirements.
Just if those of us who've been around a long time. DeBerry was the county for up until 20, 25 years ago, right? And they incorporated all of the county standards were immediately became City of DeBerry standards. But City of DeBerry went through flooding much earlier than what we've been talking about with Ian and Irma. I cannot remember the year, but DeBerry went through extensive flooding, and that would have prompted them to amend their rules and do something more restrictive.
I do know Edgewater is also.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 2000.
In 2008. Okay, thank you. I don't remember which one.
I've heard that Edgewater is also going through a similar process of trying to be a lot more restrictive on their development.
So, you know, what you had asked for last time was this comparison. I think that, you know, we have probably a little bit of work to do to tighten up the city matrix, but I think this is just sort of going to be a reference for us as we move through, you know, when you're looking at chapter 50 and you're looking at section of the code, and you're curious, oh, I wonder if so-and-so knows about this. I wonder, you know, if there's another county that does something different. So we have this, it's less of a thing that we need to all like look through and agree on right now, and more of a reference material as we move through the discussion, section by section.
I think we asked for it. We were curious about what communities were more restricted, and this gives us granularity to ask questions about why, recognizing the differences as we come through it. And is that something that should apply across the board or not? John?
So this is all earmarked around retention ponds and recovery systems that we use. And in a sense of trying to fix flood issues and problems, wouldn't it be important to look at where we have failures in these structures, design those structures of the future to prevent those failures? I mean, we can look at all those comparisons all day long, but if you get to the core of it, why did Victoria Park flood? How do you prevent that? Do we develop ordinances around that versus, well, let's just build the retention pond another foot higher and that should take care of the problem?
Excuse me for jumping in for just a second. The minutes from our last meeting were in so many ways almost, that was a really deep dive discussion that we had. And it was about many, many, many factors, but it was kind of getting to that point. It's almost like a roadmap to follow for discussions or to pick things out of. The only thing is it wasn't about one-word nets, which is what we keep running up against.
So then, looking at what we have currently and what may currently be in place, Victoria Park lies within one of these ordinances. Where did it fail, and how do we correct that in the next series of ordinances? Or how do we try to correct that if we legally can do that? I'm not saying fix Victoria, but I'm just saying for the future, you know.
Was it design, maintenance, and rainfall?
Right.
Right, and I think that, if you've been listening to some of the presentations that, Ben Bartlett has been doing, I think he's trying to get to part of that. And I think a lot of the work that you already did on chapter 72 stormwater things were in reaction to things that happened, right? And Chad talked about the location of the pond and some of the failures that happened from catastrophic failure of the pond, right? And so, what does that mean? Okay, well, maybe we don't let them put on the edge and those sorts of things. So I think you've addressed some of that. And I think, you know, Tad's been really trying to educate about, like, there are some things where things flooded, there's some places where things flooded, and the system didn't fail. The system was only designed for a 25-year storm, and we got a 500-year storm. So those are sort of the policy questions we'll have to wrestle with here and at the council, which is, we probably can't design to the worst case scenario, right? And all of your property is taken up in the stormwater system. So what is the acceptable level of risk? That's a big question, right? So it's not really a failure if the system worked as it was intended for the size storm it was built for. There are examples of failure, true, like that system didn't work either because it wasn't maintained or it wasn't designed well or whatever. And so those, I think, are the things you're gonna have to kind of grapple with is, are we designing to the right thing, right? And that's sort of the discussion we had earlier about, are we designing to the right amount of rainfall? And what is the acceptable level that we design to that, protects people from most of the time, but still, allows the use of the property for its intended use. So I certainly don't have the answer, but that's, I think, where these discussions are gonna have to go in the next meeting and maybe the one after that.
Well, and if I may too, just obviously anything that was constructed that wasn't very, very recent may not have been constructed under the current standards of that jurisdiction.
Right.
Tyler and John.
It's kind of two things based on what you just said, John. The first being Victoria Park will cause the flooding there. I think that the basin studies that eventually get conducted may identify, and was it a failure? That's something that without the basin study, I'm not willing to make a professional statement of opinion. But one of the, yes, well, maybe, I'm gonna just say maybe, because what I'd really like to see is what does the basin study say would have happened with Milton, with no Victoria Park? That's an important thing, but we talked about water's getting pumped in, we talked about that it's to maintain pond elevations. So I'm gonna point out a specific ordinance. And I want to circle back to the idea that when we have these conversations, we need to have the specific ordinance identified before we have the conversation. I think that's been derailing a lot of good conversations. And I feel that's something that Chair Lambers, you've been bringing up repeatedly as that has been an impediment to this conversation. So I'm concerned about.
It frustrates me because I would rather have a holistic discussion and then see which ordinance.
Well, and so I think that might be a point of clarification for the purpose of our body with council. But I'll get to that in a moment. So looking at the DeLand ordinances and blah, 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 I'm not seeing it. But I know the standard for the pond is that you have to have a 1 to 4 horizontal, a vertical 1 foot, 4 foot horizontal slope. Until you get 2 feet below the water line. And then you can break it to 2 to 1. So if we let the pond water line get too low, then we have a safety condition for people that could fall while entering the pond. So one of the questions that I have is, why don't we just require 4 to 1 on ponds that are in close basins like that, so that we don't have a need to artificially maintain the water level within the pond? So we don't have a safety need to pump water in there. There's little things like that that could come out of those conversations. So, the bigger picture on this is if we don't have the ordinance identified. So right now, most of the ordinance changes that are being suggested are coming from our environmental and planning staff. We're dealing with stormwater code that is pretty intricate. This matrix, you guys, I agree with Tom, you did a good job putting it together. There's a lot of information here. But the intricacies of these differences are something that, as everybody stated, Tad's going to have to explain. It's professional engineering like that we're playing with right now. I think if we're going to be reviewing ordinances, they need to come from the people who are the experts in those areas. And if not, we need to be having the open-ended conversations as a committee so that we can find the ordinance areas to task staff with looking at it. And when I say task staff, I mean the specific expert staff that would be dealing with this. So then Tad's groups would be who I would be thinking here. And that's just my opinion. I think that we're going to not get the results that council is expecting us to if we don't change the formula of how we get to ordinance changes.
So are you saying we haven't identified what specific ordinance we're going to be looking at? Is that?
So last month, the conversation got cut short and we didn't move forward with suggested ordinance changes because I didn't at the time have the ability to specify which ordinance I wanted to discuss.
But so today's meeting, we were starting to discuss the chapter 50 stormwater ordinance, right? Okay, so I just want to make sure we're clear, like what ordinance we're talking about today. Are you referring to the discussion we had about like the irrigation?
I think that we're valued as an advisory committee to the council to help deal with the current issues at hand extends beyond just the ordinances that are being, the way that the ordinances are being presented. And I think that we shouldn't be saying that we can't have a little bit more of an open-ended conversation. I think that's what John was saying is, we had a very fruitful conversation last month. We were starting to get specific causes. Once you identify causes, you can start looking at what the solutions to those could be, which of those could have unintended consequences that we don't want to consider, and which of those could work better. I can't pick the ordinance that's going to solve the problem until we have a good discussion of the problem. And so I feel like it's kind of a chicken and egg issue. I put weeks of time into developing and vetting the ordinance ideas that I brought forward for stormwater, and I appreciate most of those are getting carried forward to council now. But there's information that Wendy has, for example. I can't go talk to Wendy outside of this meeting. So if I can't have an open-ended conversation at this meeting without knowing exactly what we're working on, it's very hard to actually be effective. That's, I think, the point I'm making.
So, and excuse me, Tom, I am recognizing you. Jessica, in a way, brought this up at the council meeting. So we have it in, here's my problem as a chair. We have 3 hours together a month. And our enabling resolution says that we have to make recommendations that are ordinances or that are minimum standards. So we do have a work product that we are tasked with producing. I did ask at the end of the year last year if we were okay with the meetings being very discussion heavy rather than being like the PLDRC, here's the paper, say yes, say no, move on. And we agreed that we wanted to continue discussing. Personally, I'd love it if someone, I'm actually kind of looking more to legal, I think, to crack the nut. And Jessica brought it up, is our remit to talk about everything.
I got this.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. This is fun. This is the good part. As a former city commissioner, I had multiple investigations launched against me for violations of sunshine rules. All of them went away. There was nothing to them. I've served on planning and zoning boards and other boards for decades under sunshine rules. And here's the advice I have to all of us. There are fewer rules than you think. We can talk to each other. I've become the expert. The main thrust of sunshine and government sunshine is that we cannot profit from our discussions. Beyond that, we can pretty much say what we want. You can take, and the lawyers will take it to the other extreme. They'll say, if you even say, is it gonna rain? You may be talking about flooding. You can't say stuff like that. The other option is, how are you gonna vote on this? We're not doing that. But to just be Tyler in the hallway and say, did you see what Edgewater did? What do you think of that? That is perfectly legal. And legal left.
We got.
I know Sarah Lee's looking at me.
Morgan is still here. Morgan is legal and that's different from the guidance we got.
I know, I've been coached 15 times on this, and no offense, man, but a lot of what they tell us is because they don't want to get in trouble for not coaching us wrong. But there are truly fewer rules than you think. If you really read the sunshine rules carefully, if you don't stand to profit, chances are nobody's going to file a claim against you. Maybe that's the 60s talking. I don't know.
Anything that could possibly come before the board, should not be discussed amongst 2 or more members outside of meeting notice of the sunshine. So, no, you talking about the weather is much different than you having a conversation that may involve stormwater and what other counties, cities, et cetera, are doing. You say it's a nice day out, that's taking it to an extreme. But you're saying, hey, I've noticed this other, city is doing this, maybe we should bring it up in the meeting, things like that should not be discussed outside of notice meeting.
You just made my point. Okay, but I just want to throw out, I have become something of an expert on the subject. And if somebody says this is a sunshine rule, you just say prove it, and they'll go away every time.
So, but just kind of moving back to how we want to operate. considering
I
that,
know.
that the product, because one of the things that was recognized when I asked the question at the end of last year, do you want a tighter meeting or do you want to continue to have conversations? One of the reasons was that we learn from one another because there are other areas of expertise. Michelle.
I was gonna shift gears a little bit, just thinking about hurricanes in the past and other parts of the country like Texas and Hurricane Harvey. I'm sure they changed their stormwater regulations after they've had their hurricane. And there was something that we can lean on, maybe look at what things they do, their stormwater regulations and how are they now, right? And how are they being affected now? If they actually improved. So they haven't had any big storms since then, but when Harvey was 15, 17, around then, that might be interesting as well from stormwater regulations, so we're reading what they can.
The Houston area. Yeah.
Something to consider.
Is that something we'd like to ask staff to look at? Pre-post Harvey in Houston, Texas area?
I personally know the expert on it. I could get in here.
Through the magic of technology?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Order. I want to get to talk now.
I've got right here. So Dr. Sam Brody, he teaches for Texas A&M University at the Galveston campus. And I will read you his bio really fast, but he is a colleague of mine and Dr. Jason Evans at Stetson. He is the director of the Department of Marine and Coastal Environmental Science. He is he has a PhD in urban planning. He's from North Carolina. He did his PhD in North Carolina, but he did his PhD dissertation many, many years ago in Florida and Texas. And his deep roots in Florida as well. So I've been talking with him about possibly coming sometime this spring to do some public presentations on the east side, the west side, possibly even one to council if we can get that scheduled. And he was actually instrumental in writing legislation for the state of Texas after Hurricane Harvey to change how they do their stormwater design system. So I mean, we've got a guy and, you know, he's a middle-aged white guy. So, you know, in terms of whatever that means, just saying, he is a known expert around the country that, that we could get here for, and Dr. in our institute, steps on to pay for it.
Does anybody want to move to ask Wendy to make this happen?
That's definitely.
Get more clarity.
Okay.
So, I don't mind. I can jump in just 1 second. I don't mind bringing in experts, but where are we going? We could get experted to death and still not come to any solutions. What works in Texas might possibly work here, but that would be a presentation for the Florida legislation, not Volusia County. And I'm not trying to disagree with you, Wendy, but I do think we can expert ourselves out the door and not get anything accomplished.
Which is why I haven't really pushed it because, I mean, I talked to Chairman Brower about this back in October. Right, actually, the day that Milton was heading, I was talking to Sam going, I think we're gonna need you here in the next couple of months. And he's like, let me know. And I talked to Jeff afterwards and I'm like, hey, can we get this guy in? Maybe in time for these meetings that we've been going through in January, February. And, you know, and Sam was willing to come, he's willing to come this week, next week. And Jeff just said, you know, I think I just really want to keep it local and hear from ENRAC. And he didn't really bite on it. And I mean, he's interested, not interested. And so I think it's to John's point, it's like, how many experts do we need to hear from? Maybe all we need to do is read the ordinance that he penned and see if that's something that applies here. And save ourselves the travel and the cost and just review that. And it's further than, you know, than your analysis. But if there's something really innovative there, I think let's look at it.
I'm willing to travel to Texas and hang out for a couple of years to see it.
Oh, just that.
Just go do it.
County there.
San Antonio. Okay.
Tyler.
I agree with the last thought you had. I think step one is let's look at what the ordinance is and see, I mean, what I don't know is what the ordinance before or after the change was. I'm extremely ignorant on the topic of what Texas did. I do know that Florida tends to have more rain than most areas in the rest of the country. So when I compare our stormwater standards, we tend to have much more mature standard sets than most of the places that I compare with. So I'd be curious to see if Texas is ahead of us in their regulations, or if maybe they modeled some of their changes after what we do. And that would be interesting to hear from him. However, I think I agree with John, before we spend the time on that, we should look at where it goes.
Jessica and Ginger.
Yeah, my only attorney comment there is that, one, I know 2 facts about Texas, maybe 3. But one is that they don't have any state mandated growth management laws, or like zoning rules. So they have a very different structure. And 2, they have a completely different basis in their case law system on rights to water. Which is they're the opposite system as we are, which is we say you cannot impede the flow of water through properties. They say if you capture it, you get to keep it forever. And people are very focused on that element. And so it's a consumptive water law system versus ours. So that definitely has trickled down impacts just by water regulation.
So I guess from a staff perspective, we want to know how you want to proceed. And the way I see it, we have a couple of options. We have a chapter 50 stormwater standard that we have made available, but can do again. And you can look at that standard as it exists now and contemplate ways you might like to see it modified. It seems to me the first an early thing to look at is, would you want to implement the changes that you recommended to chapter 72 in that minimum standard, right? Which is sort of an easy button. And the answer may be no, we don't, but that would be, at least in my mind, a place to start. Like, are the things we recommended in 72, do they make sense to do countywide? And maybe there are other things in addition to that. So the alternative to taking that, sort of maybe narrowly focused, here's the ordinance that we have, what do you want to see done to it, is maybe the Tyler model, which is, here's the problem, let's find the universal ordinances that address that problem. And we can do that. If you say, here's what we want to do, the staff collectively, not just environmental management staff, can say, all right, here are all the places in the code that address that particular issue, and bring them. And I think we did that last time, where we gave you the landscape code, we gave you the irrigation code, and we gave you, all the things. We can certainly do it that way. It matters not to the staff. What we want to make sure is that we have clear enough direction that we're providing what you need for the next meeting, so that we don't spin wheels because you don't have what you need, or, proceeding with it. So that's my request, is that just, whatever it is, let us know so that we can do the best we can and get it.
Bill and Tyler.
So I heard that 2 options. One, you could just bring the chapter 50 with the changes we made to 72 as a starting point. Seems logical to me. Or we could get you stormwater engineers on or with Chad and suggest something. But I do think what I'm hearing is we want a draft change ordinance, right, to start debating.
Eventually.
Right, I mean, pretty soon. That's
That's our work
think.
product. That's our finished product, is ordinance. It has to be, though. I mean,
Right.
I don't disagree.
That's what we do. So we need a draft, right, of the changes. Is that what you're saying? Or we need to debate first and then go into the,
I think we have to have. Excuse Melissa said something earlier that I think was really insightful, which is that as much disagreement as we have on the committee, there's a really large amount of commonality in what we think are good ideas. And to that end, most of what was suggested for chapter 72, I would agree should move forward with chapter 50. There's a couple of items that I think we should drop out for now while we wait to see how they team. The thing that I heard from the public was there were three general areas of flooding that I heard repeatedly. One is rural areas that are marginally above floodplain, that maybe the access roads aren't, maybe they aren't publicly maintained roads. Maybe they're in Daytona Park Estates as well, some areas like that that were built in flatwoods. So that's a challenge. That is an existing entitlement challenge that I don't think ENRAC is going to really successfully solve. So I'm going to kind of ignore that. I heard Miller Lake, that's Orange City, common flooding problem that's existed for 2 decades at least. I heard Victoria Park area that we kind of talked about last month. I think that discuss the problem, look at potential solutions, draft some potential ordinances that would support those solutions, and then debate those ordinances. Direction is what I would suggest. And I would say, let's pick one of these two. Let's pick Victoria Park or Miller Lake. And let's have a discussion of what went wrong, what went right, what are all the conflating factors that go into it, and what can Volusia County as a government agency do to prevent that from happening elsewhere or here again. And that's what I actually did when I was trying to come up with the stormwater ordinance suggestions for chapter 72. So I mean, we had a pond failure here, we had a pond failure here, we had flooding here, we had flooding here. What are things that I, as an engineer, in laying the projects out that are adjacent to it, could have done differently to make it better, the end result better? And so I started writing those down, and a bunch of them I couldn't figure out how to make the ordinance work. The unintended consequences, the challenges from, one year to the other were too much. Yeah, and so I think that is an important part of the process. Is right now we have a lot of answers that are being brought to us as suggested ordinances, and kind of like I was complaining about LID. There's people who don't like those answers, but they're just not fighting because they don't want the conflict. So they're going to come out of the woodwork if we just keep talking from these are the ideas that we have approach. And that's what we've seen from council. It's why there's been inaction and a lack of success. And otherwise is because the common ground in the past was on, we need to have a 15-foot buffer around all the edges of our developments so we can get a 30-foot wildlife corridor. Didn't actually result in a flooding prevention action. So if we want to see a flooding prevention action, I think we have to say, hey, our ideas so far maybe aren't the best ideas that are going to solve this, and we need to take a step back and regroup them. So I would, I'll end this. I'd like to make a motion that we do that. I don't want to call it the Tyler plan, but I'd like that. That we have a holistic discussion of, let's say, Miller Lake Basin and what causes the flooding there, and what are things that are tools in our toolbox to solve it.
I'll second that.
Discussion. I have discussion just a little. There's a lot to unpack in that, so I like problem solving, and I like having an overarching goal and then getting to the specific tactics or actions or pieces that lead to the solution. In our construct, to me, the topic would be perhaps flooding. What are the things that cause flooding? Where are the solutions to these things? Then draft the ordinance. I think we're kind of in the same neighborhood on that. Maybe even better than the same neighborhood. And then the ordinance becomes a specific. That's it's the process I've followed professionally. It's a messy process. I think it yields good results oftentimes. And there was another piece I wanted to, on the LID, just to make sure I'm not losing my mind. When we started working on LID, yes, it deals mostly with water. But I think from a perspective of Wendy's or mine, it also deals with other environmental concerns that we might have. So I don't look at LID. I agree with you. It's being kind of marketed to the public as a be all end all to to, flooding. I don't necessarily think of it that way. I do think it's important and I do support it as a tool in the toolkit very much, but not as the tool in the toolkit for flooding. I do like it for other things. So I guess on the motion that's on the floor to adopt the Tyler plan, which is to discuss broadly and winnow down to an ordinance, just it's going to be a little more lengthy probably than what we've been doing because it opens up, right? Okay, any other discussion? John, you're on.
I was going to speak before the motion, so I'm not speaking to the motion.
Okay, Jessica, are you discussing?
After you get the motion done, I'll.
I think it's a great idea. I just want to talk about the practicalities of it, not to take away from it, to say I would love to do it. Which is that I think we need to get back to doing some homework. And I think that I say that because I have also fallen off on providing track changes as we go. Like when we first started it, I know we call it the dark days, but on trees, we did an overview on how trees work. We had staff recommended changes and we were asked to add a row. We went through all of those. That's kind of where we're landing back to a bit. I don't know how it's different.
I know that everybody grows, we talk about trees because it took so much energy and that's why we moved to a different model. It matters not to me, but we didn't like that model.
Forgive an interruption to both of you. When we did the track changes, what we lacked, and that was a good addition, was an overview from staff. When you marry an overview to a track changes, maybe we're cooking with gas.
Because otherwise we're all just chatting, and I do like it, and I think it is a good discussion. But I think the disconnect that Tyler has pointed out is that we've now talked about this topic quite a bit, and we don't really have any end goals or end solutions. So if we were talking about this in the context of, here's the language Tyler recommended, what are our thoughts and edits there, that gives us direction.
Any more, John, still, no?
I'm not, I haven't, think of before the motion is made.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have a second, Tom seconded.
So what is the motion?
So the motion is to talk about flooding in a specific place.
Yeah, to look at the Miller Lake Basin flooding that has occurred. We had, it's one of the smaller basins. I think there's going to be easier opportunity for us to have conversation of what the contributing factors are, what the county has already done. So for those of you that don't know, in 2008, Miller Lake flooded pretty substantially. There are a series of changes that were made that were coordinated with the city of Orange City, city of DeBerry, FDOT, and Volusia County relating to the interconnection of a series of stormwater ponds that pump to one another. One of them being a pond adjacent to Miller Lake that is serving the DOT facility. In 2017, there were changes to the Royal Oaks Professional Center stormwater system, which will result in an increase in discharge of water to Miller Lake. That was one of the things that came up in discussion and public comment at the January 14th meeting. I think it's a great basin for us to look at because there's a lot of government action. There's Orange City, there's Volusia County, and there's FDOT, as well as the agreements with DeBerry, which was part of that change that DeBerry went through. So I think we discussed that basin. Here's the properties that the county bought because they were recurrent flooding properties. Here are the solutions the county identified. Here's the study that Pegasus Engineering put together back in, I believe it was like 2009 on this that shows all of the modeling for the area. Here's the changes that have happened since then. We had the development where Wawa went in and filled part of the Royal Oaks Lake that was there and other things. How has that affected us? And did development make it worse? Or did we just get more rain? And some of those are things that, I can't come in advance of that conversation with ordinances. That's one of the things that I want to leave as an expectation is last month I couldn't point to the ordinance because I was gathering the information to digest, to go back to do the homework, to create the ordinance.
On the reclaim.
On what we were talking about, which is pumping water into a development. And the conversation got cut short, so I didn't have enough information in order to finish and develop a proposed ordinance. because I still needed to get information from that Wendy was sharing with us during that conversation and hammer out and define numbers. I can then go back and say, this represented about an extra 7 inches of rain over the basin. One of the things I did as homework was I found some beautiful infrared mapping data that NASA put together of evapotranspiration rates of all different ground cover types, and like a multi-decade study that included Florida. And so what you see is that urbanized areas transpirate about 30 inches per year. Lakes transpirate upwards of 60 inches per year. Wetlands are in the low to mid 50s. Forested uplands are anywhere in the 40s. So if we really want to bring some science in, there is a lot of science out there, and I'm trying to educate myself and be up to date, but there's a lot of conversation that happens. And so any of these things are going to be a two-part discussion if we go to this model. There's no way that we can, on the first meeting that we discuss a topic, expect that we're going to know what ordinances we should be changing. I think that's where the homework comes in. Is after that discussion, we all need to go back, educate ourselves on the blind spots that got illuminated, and have ideas for proposed ordinance changes that we send in and we can discuss and debate through at the next meeting. There may have to be a third meeting where staff comes back to us with the combined mess of ingredients with a proposed ordinance. That isn't to say that we can't discuss multiple topics at each meeting, but to start with flooding, I think we need to pick a base and start looking at it from a reverse perspective from how we have.
Bill, Jack.
Okay. I'll go. It'll be just brief. An advantage I see to Tyler's proposal is that starting small like this will expose people in this room to the words, phrases, and policies and procedures that get to an ordinance. And it will be a learning experience for all of us. If we move on to bigger things, we won't be asking a lot of questions that have already been answered because we know what we're talking about. That's the osmosis part of this.
Jack.
I'm worried about getting into the details too much, and I think he's right. I think the more we know and the more we discuss, the better off we are. I'm just not sure that we as a group are prepared to get that deep and be thorough enough to say, okay, that's it. I mean, we saw what's happened before, and this seems like we're digging back in versus moving forward. I thought we were further along with the ordinance work as we were going to present next week. I thought, okay, you're saying, granted, none of them are saving grace, right? All of them are just steps in the right direction. And I think we can go further, but I think we should be smart about how we go further, because if we just get into a broad stroke discussion on solving flooding, okay, and then all the problems and get into these individually, I think this can get really encumbering, and I'm not sure we get very far. And when Tyler says the next meeting and whatnot, I think that's optimistic, because what happens is that we know how that goes. It slides to the next meeting, and then we're interrupted by something else that takes place, and the thing stretches on. And to me, I tend to want to get things done productively, even if they're small steps, and then another small step, versus taking the holistic position, whittling it down, and then doing it. So I can't support the title of Lincoln only because of its overwhelming need to build the ordinance at the end of the day that helps to solve the flooding problem.
So the Miller Lake one is Sand Hill, West Side. Is that different from, can we also look at something east side which has plenty of drainage and, can we look at both? I do support looking at something specific and figuring out why it fails before we dive into the ordinance.
Reason I didn't suggest that is I don't know of a area where that has been. I didn't hear that from the public, so I don't know where to pick. And some of that is my own ignorance to those specific issues, but I don't mean this to be the only thing that we look at. I just needed this. We need to start somewhere and just get a little bit tighter because one of the things that kept coming up is case by case. So you're right, the east side does have different challenges. And I do think that that's an area we should be looking at as well.
It was Michelle then John.
So don't we have basin studies?
We do.
So would it make sense to hold and look at those basin studies and get the information from that? And maybe just focus on one thing. Like I'm just throwing something out there, like the maintenance of it, right? The existing condition, like maybe we just tackle one thing like maintenance, right? Instead of stormwater design, we focus on, okay, what is the regulation on the maintenance side can we do to move forward and get something done to Jackson? And then you go on basis.
And where would, so excuse a question really quick, just following up on that. This is an example of where I can feel some frustration. Where does that fit?
Temps said we haven't let the basin study contract.
So I mean, something like requiring maintenance. I believe Clay mentioned that earlier today.
So there are two options, right? Like the same kind of two options we always had. There are things that we do in chapter 72 that apply in the unincorporated county. Talked about those for stormwater, and then there are the things in chapter 50 that would apply to everyone. So those are really the two places that we can look. I mean, you heard Clay earlier say if there are things in the comprehensive plan, for instance, that we need to be changed, that would make those recommendations to the planning staff. Well, maintenance is probably one of those things. That the detail is probably not a comment, right? But there are things that you could talk about that would need a comp plan to change. But really, those are the three places. Now, there, Tyler's point, there are 10 different ordinances that might touch on a specific topic. We kind of got that last time. Where do we talk about reclaim? Well, here and here and here and here and here.
Or like doing the LID audit.
Right, all parts of the code. And then that's what we can help with is if you have an idea, we want to fix this thing, where are all the places that thing exists in the code, we can help.
John?
Yeah, and I'm from the point of efficiency and not that Tyler's process isn't a valuable process, but I just keep reflecting back on tree ordinance. And I'm sorry, I see that taking a year. The council wants answers. We need to come up with solutions. And if I'm not mistaken, there's 50 more overarching, that is more general brushstrokes versus the details of 72.
Yeah, typically, the chapter 50 is sort of the broad standards, and 72 is sometimes more restrictive, and it has all the process type of things, right? Because it's the way we implement the ordinance. With how do you apply, how do you appeal, that kind of stuff.
So it wouldn't do us a lot of good to get into all the different basins. It wouldn't do us to get into any good to do all the different watersheds in 50. That should happen at a 72 or better, or even back into, code, I guess, development code. But I just think we should be more simplistic, but specific in chapter 50, and then detail the needs under those basic concepts back in 72. And so I'm just trying to avoid going into another tree ordinance. I'm sorry.
The other difference between 50 and 72 is 50 applies to the municipalities.
Correct. I get that.
Just.
So the only thing I'll say to that, and I also love efficiency, and I think this is almost getting back into a work plan discussion. Approved. But the key takeaway yesterday, and we've kind of talked about it, is that there is, I won't say pressure, but a lot of eyes on this body to be the individuals who come up with a plan, right? And you just said something important, which is the county wants answers. And they want something fast, but the discussion yesterday stated at council was, can we be sure that what you're bringing before us works? And that's a balance that I think we're past trees. I understand this is the one we use, but look at, what we have done since, and we have been pulled away in some, but we've made great progress since then with kind of a similar structure of education, going back, looking at it. And I don't know that we can say, let's toss out this answer to have a step, when that could have long lasting impacts, is my conclusion.
Tyler, are you up because you want to say something? And then Wendy?
Yeah, I just want to kind of defend this isn't trees. So trees came up, it's a topic that some people are upset. They have an emotional damage by watching somebody else cut down trees on their property. Flooding is something that people experience physical damage as a result of. We have been tasked with finding solutions and recommending them and standing behind them by council. I don't feel comfortable standing behind solutions that aren't properly vetted, which without conversation of the problem that the solution is to, I don't know how we can properly vet a solution against other ideas that might be out there. So trees is dealing with a feelings problem more than a physical damages problem in a large sense. We don't have an equal quantification from the public of what is a problem and what isn't. But flooding, if your house is underwater, I think generally speaking, the public is pretty unified that that is a problem. So I think the difference we have is the charge on it. And because of that difference in the charge, I think it is appropriate for us to take the more open-ended deep dive approach to make sure there are solutions that we bring forward are appropriate. But that's the reason I'm making the recommendation. And the distinction I see, I think that otherwise, to some extent, we're wasting our time to discuss some of the ideas if we don't have that more open-ended opportunity.
Ginger, do you have your card up, and Wendy?
John's still waiting.
No, I'll stop, because, actually, I think it might have some, it had to do with the data here. Nicole and Ian caused, in my mind, everybody to think about going on here, this is different. And the municipalities started to look at that. Milton caused them to act. Every municipality, at least the ones down in my area, New Smyrna, Edgewater, that's all I talked about. And actually they did acting. And in fact, either yesterday or the day before, I saw the plan that Edgewater implemented to deal with flooding that they had. I'm sure there are other municipalities that have already done some of this work. I mean, looking at a particular area, to try and mitigate what happened. So I would suggest we might contact, New Smyrna's saying we need to change they're saying we need to change the ordinance. That's because of the stuff they've been doing recently. So while I think this is very important, I think some of the things that have happened just in the last 4 or 5 months would be valuable for us to know about. And I do think that we can look at, particular areas, east, west, whatever.
Ginger, and then Wendy?
Two things. One that, at least in my mind, that I'm hearing is different about the motion that was made, is that we're not talking about any particular ordinance, we're talking about a topic, and then we're going to identify which ordinances apply, which is different than we've done so far, right? Even our list of our work plans, which ordinance. I'm not saying that it's not okay, I'm just saying it's a different model than we've done before. And it's, I think that ultimately what you guys want to talk about next month is about the chapter 50 stormwater ordinance, right? But it's been maybe presented in a little bit different way, like maybe it's not about the ordinance, it's about the problem. To John's point, this did look at the proposed changes in New Smyrna Beach, so hopefully that's captured in they're proposing. And I think, when we're getting back to this idea of the two parts of the code that we're looking at, the implementing ordinance and the unincorporated county and the minimum standard, maybe if I can ask ourselves, and maybe it's at the next meeting, is based on the research that has now been done, is there a need to change the minimum standard because cities aren't doing enough, right? If the minimum standard is sufficient and the cities are doing sufficient stormwater, then maybe the minimum standard isn't a problem, right? And we then do what we do in chapter 72, which we're working on, and maybe there's more to come, I don't know. But you know, we don't need to change chapter 50 if we don't need to change it. So that's part of why we wanted to do this, like what is going on in the cities? If cities are doing something more, we don't need to change the ordinance that tells them they need to do more, right? I just want to throw that out there as a sort of general, keep in the back of your head about the reason we have chapter 50, which is compel a minimum standard in the whole county. If that's not an issue, really have to go there. So, sorry.
That's a good idea. Wendy?
I know we're running out of time, but I'm kind of running through the process that Tyler proposes. Thinking about Miller Lake, and I don't know a whole lot about that system, you know, but I'm just what I do know. So I just opened up chapter 50, not chapter 72, chapter 50, and I kind of just slid down into site alteration activities, and then design stormwater retention. So let me go on a little bit further. This language is really general. So chapter 50 is general. A positive drainage system shall be provided which will not adversely impact downstream owners or adjacent lands.
Right, big picture.
That's big picture stuff. Okay, that was a failure. This language does not need to be changed. It needs to be enforced.
The ordinance.
But this language does not need to be changed. Where possible, natural vegetation, including trees, I will add, shall be used as a component of drainage design. The water table should not be manipulated so as to endanger natural vegetation beneficial to water quality unless natural vegetation can be replanted and survive with lower water table condition. And it's more about water table than vegetation, but you know what, it's both there. That's a great ordinance. I mean, this is good language that's in here. I mean, I've said this at the podium so many times. We have good ordinances if we would just follow them. So, you know, runoff from higher adjacent land shall be considered. And, so that's where you're gonna build in lower land, possibly with some fill. And, you know, that's an area that used to receive drainage and now you're gonna fill it so that that drainage is backed up. Like, it's addressed right there. Don't do it. And so, I mean, we could look at Miller Lake and we could say, look, the language in the ordinance or in chapter 50 should have prevented most of the things that happen there. Yeah, there, and it didn't, but it isn't because the language isn't correct.
So that's one of the things we talked about at the last minute, even just, you know, compliance.
Yeah.
We don't enforce compliance necessarily because we don't want to pay for enforcing compliance.
Can I rebut something on that? So what I want to mention here is that there are the presumptive criteria that we have as engineers, that it is, if you follow that criteria, it is presumed that you have met that rule. And so I think we need to look at both layers and not just the upper layer, because I find that there are some cases I've encountered where I don't feel like the presumptive criteria is strict enough to actually meet the rule the way that it's written. The code that we have to follow says that we are not negligent as long as we meet that presumptive criteria.
When you say presumptive criteria, do you mean chapter 72? Do you
No.
say ordinance?
Chapter 50, a little bit further down, they describe that discharge hydrograph, 25-year, 24-hour storm. The entry involved. It's all in there. That's in chapter 50 with the size storm.
Right.
Which is the presumptive criteria that he's talking about.
And so what I'm saying is that presumptive criteria sometimes waters down the effectiveness of that first set of language. And because they're both there, we're held to the weaker of the two standards.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, so the one benefit to taking a look at Miller Lake, for example, or any of these examples, you know, as Tyler just said, the design is done to the presumptive criteria. It's an open basin, it's the 25-year, 24-hour storm. Closed basin, it's either the 124 or the 2596, depending on whose rules apply. What you can do though is now you can take a look at, okay, well, what level of storm these developments have been designed to handle 100 years, 72 hours? Would that have created that same condition? Is the presumptive standard the right and appropriate storm to use? Because that's really the question that has come up overall. The GIS system was taking a look at Slightly different terms, but it's the same exact concept. Is the storm the right storm? That's the question, and looking at a particular location, saying, okay, this is what we had, what gets us there? It also basically has you to look at then what your definition of flooding is. Because, you know, you have certain situations where, look, you've got water in a driveway. Is that equivalent in people's mind to water inside a house? You know, one of the other things that you get when you take a look at the other counties, you see that some of them have established a level of service for their stormwater. And that level of service, they say, okay, roads are allowed to flood at this level. Homes or habitable structures are never allowed to flood. You measure that versus a 100-year storm, and they give a size storm. So they've gone through, they've actually established what level is acceptable overall. We don't have them. And so, you know, we basically say flooding and flooding, and we react to it. Our first concern is obviously water and homes, and then businesses, and then, you know, access to those. That's something that needs to be considered and established as well. So going through the process of taking a look at a place like Angel Lake gives you the opportunity to take a look at that, because flooding on every parcel is not the same. Some people can't get to their homes because they're 200 feet of water on the road. Their home's fine. So we tackle, you know, do we change the rules to establish different aspects? Some people's homes are flooded. That's obviously a priority. What do we do to make changes to the standards to make sure that that doesn't happen? Because there's different ways to skin that cat. Part of the way we set everything, if you recall from, we talked about at the very first meeting, we use our seasonal high, that sets our road elevation. Our road elevation for the Florida building code sets the finished floor elevation for each other. Not all the rules end up in one location. It's a group of rules, and potentially something else should be modified, not just chapter 50 or chapter 72, something else. So looking at a case study gives you the opportunity to see what the natural effects are, evaluate what happened, what failed, and what to resolve in the future. Anything else is flat out guesswork. We could change the storm, but there's always going to be a bigger storm. That's always the way it is. You know, and so to say that it's never going to happen again, that just seems. So going out there, trying to actually figure out what the problems are, solving those, is going to be a much better result. It's going to take time. Basin studies could be done in a matter of probably months, but the results are not going to be worth the crap, because you really need to go out there and take a look at, you know, tailwater conditions. Is the tailwater condition lower because it's dry right now, or is it too high because it's wet right now? Getting that over time and being able to compare that to different storms during a time period gives you the opportunity to be able to set and calibrate those appropriate reasons. So that takes time to do so. Obviously, nobody wants flooding to occur next year, and we want these done as soon as possible. But you're going to get what you pay for if you're too impatient.
Thank you, Ted. Morgan's been waiting to say something, and then I think we should vote.
I just wanted to mention where the individual who seconded the motion is no longer in the meeting. He will need to have a second to proceed.
Second.
Okay, motion now seconded by Jessica Gow. All those in favor of, I'm going to call it a case study approach for our next meeting? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Confused? I didn't get the count. I'm sorry, but I believe it carried.
Take care.
About it. It carried. Thank you.
Gotta vote if you have a conflict.
Sorry, I don't need to know like the number.
Roll call.
Yeah.
Just raise your hand.
Yes. For the eyes.
Guys.
Case study. Okay.
Nothing.
Yeah,
I have to vote.
unless you've.
All right, I'll give it a try.
So the nays are. Okay, so, I'm looking at Tad because what you asked for is not what I'm gonna provide, so you guys are gonna be ready on March 5th to do a case study for Minter Lake.
Oh, no, we won't be able to do something.
Come on.
Okay. Can I freestyle here for a second? What I'm sensing from the group is we're not comfortable with our current product that we sent to council, or maybe it was a good product, but we're concerned that we haven't gone far enough. Is that a fair statement? No? Okay. Okay.
For me, it is.
It is gonna be good.
I think what we have is a great product. It's incomplete.
Thank you. That is a better statement of it. And so that's driving, I'm glad we want to do a good job. I'm glad that that's what people are looking to do. And at the end of the day, we have an approved work plan and it's ordinal. And we have a hungry public that is pressuring our council. So if we can't address our number one thing, chapter 50, next meeting, what can we address next meeting? Because after that, it's, I don't have it in front of me. Thank you, Jennifer.
School water management minimum standards are part of, it doesn't say chapter 50, it just says stormwater.
Well, the minimum standards are chapter 50. That's why it's called, the chapter is called environmental minimum standards, right? I think.
Yes.
While we're in free for all, I was going to suggest that we look at the 72, the chapter 72 suggestions that are going to council and discuss those for implementation on chapter 50. We still have that conversation. I don't think it's a bad product to start with. I think that also between now and a few weeks from now, I'm gonna give myself 3 weeks, I can gather some information on Miller Lake so that we can at least have an opening conversation of, more what we want to add and then maybe put together, because I think I need some information from Ben's group as well on what they've done out there. But I think that it's reasonable that we could have some conversation on what the history is. Like I said, Pegasus did a study in 2009. So I have that study. I have a lot of permits that I've already been putting a folder together on this topic. So
Tyler's suggesting homework, Jessica.
I was gonna say, I don't think we're off of our plan. I think that this is just, we said last meeting, and I think it's good to reiterate, because I know sometimes it feels like we're going back. We said, this is what we're doing now. They're great safety improvements. We need council direction on what else they want us to look at. We got that. So that's now part of what else we're going to look at. So I think we're still following our plan. I think Tyler just said it'd be nice to have some examples when we have those discussions. So I don't want to scare everybody that we're.
Because we're presenting, what we're saying is being planned next week in a workshop. Are we not?
Is it, it is a.
I think it's a solid step. I think it's a great thing. That's what I think it is. And I would agree with that. But the fact is that we're presenting what we think is not thorough. Okay, and we want to get it right. He said we want to get it right and all those things. I say it's a step in the right direction and let's go to the next thing. And for that, I'm up for it. But what I'm not up for is say, okay, we're not there because this plan doesn't address it. And yet we're going to county council on a workshop next week. And that makes me very uncomfortable.
And we had agreed that we were going to take it forward, even knowing that it might change in the face of the basin plans or the information that.
But do we agree with that now?
I still agree with that.
And I think the sentiment that you're getting at is, I'm saying, and we can all confirm, that what is going forward to council is complete. For what it does.
I think it's complete for what it does.
Correct.
I do.
Yeah, and we don't feel that it is lacking in terms of technical review or
Does
recommendation.
Tyler think that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So my opinion is that there were about 30 ideas that I had that I didn't bring to you guys. There are about 5 ideas that I brought to you guys. Those 30 I couldn't refine in my bubble. I need that bubble to be in this room so that we can bring those other things forward, talk through if any of them are viable. And if they're not, they get, ejected just like I ejected them. I will say, I asked a lot of peers and I started getting feedback last week from some of them 3 months after I sent the original requests and followed up and otherwise. So part of the challenge that I've had is my bubble just isn't big enough. And so my request here has just been that, hey, I think that everything that we've done are great improvements to our existing code. I don't think any of them are we going to walk back or modify, but there are other areas of the code that we didn't touch yet. So in the sense, I think it's incomplete. I think there's areas of code that could be strengthened to better provide the mitigation that the council is looking for. But I don't think we have near enough information to take action on those today, and it would be reckless to do so.
The ordinance is not incomplete, but solving the problem of flooding is.
That's a perfect phrase. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but we were never gonna solve the flooding problem. I mean, that wasn't.
Oh, come on, Jack. Have more faith.
The objective was to get the ordinance better, to improve the ordinance, and that's what we're addressing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and, but I don't know that the council thinks that. Okay, I'm not sure they see it as a stepping stone and that there's these other elements that's still coming down. Just as we said that the low impact development to the silver bullet and all that. I mean, I know they're trying to grab onto these things and show the public that in fact they're taking action. But yeah, I think it's a stepping stone like anything else. And then this is the next step. But yeah, that's comment should be made to the council that in fact there's much more to come.
Conservation study. We did say that.
That is our principle.
Okay. Wendy?
So to bring us back to where we did this action.
All right.
Which is stormwater management minimum standards, which is chapter 50. I've been looking at it and just pulled it out. It's short. It's not very long. It's not like the tree, chapter 72. It's not that. We should, and what Tyler said in his exercise remark, which was we already have proposed changes for 72. Number one, let's make sure that those are mapping onto chapter 50 so we don't have inconsistencies. That's a pretty easy task. Let's do it. And if that becomes an opportunity to say, hey, maybe what we sent forward for chapter 72 isn't exactly what we meant, or we want to change it, it's an opportunity to revisit that. But chapter 50 is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot that we're going to want to change because it's already really good, except for the things that we already changed in 72, which at the moment are inconsistent with 50. Let's just do that work. It's on our work plan. It's approved. I love the idea of the case studies, even though I voted against it. I don't want us to get lost in unpacking Miller Lake or lost in unpacking Detroit Park and not do the task at hand, which is run through 2.5 pages of language and make sure it's what it's supposed to say. I mean, it's simple. It's simple. We're making it harder than it has to be. And we can use the case studies for examples to explain like, oh, this is how it would work in this case or that case. But I think that our next step is pretty clear and straightforward.
So then are we just diving into that, or are we gonna have some case study or a hybrid approach?
Yeah, you're right. Go ahead. Sorry.
So what are we doing? Are we gonna have a little bit of a case study and then
Right, so
talk about it?
the motion to be, we're gonna have the case study of Miller Lake. But then what I heard from Tad is that can't be at the next meeting. So
that
it couldn't happen, then yes, you voted that we wanted to do that, but they won't be prepared for it in 1 month.
what's on the table now, in substitution, because CAB would not have Miller Lake ready. A very practical thing to do, and Wendy reiterated it, Tyler had said, look at chapter 72, look at chapter 50, see if they're matching up, see if there's anything that is rising to the surface that might need changing for chapter 50. In parallel, it is possible that through staff, Tyler ends up in sending us something about Miller Lake. But right now, what I heard was what we can do next time is, having done our homework, chapter 50, the changes we made to chapter 72, are they coherent?
On storm.
On stormwater. Yes, on stormwater, just on stormwater. Yes. Is that?
So what I will do, what I'm gonna send out after this meeting are the materials that you got today, the stuff I printed electronically, the PowerPoints, post all of that on the website, so that'll take care of the things we talked about. And then in preparation for the next meeting, after the council meeting on the 11th, we'll send out whatever got approved, right? Because we don't even know yet what's getting approved for the stormwater standards. And I will send out again or post the chapter 50 stormwater standards so that you can have all of that in preparation for the next meeting. And then if Tyler has things that he wants to go out to the group, obviously, share all that. Yes?
Just, are you going yes or? Okay. I saw that. All right, Sarah Lee?
Do we have to announce if we're gonna be at the February 11th?
Yes,
I'm gonna be at February 11th.
I'm planning to for now.
Probably me too.
Okay.
Can I also just throw in a great big thank you to Jesse and Eliza for putting together this
Yes.
wonderful story. I mean, I know that we kind of were like, what is we looking at this? But no, I think it's helpful. And I think it would be good in this, as part of our homework, if we would actually put our eyeballs on this.
Yep.
And do it and maybe bring some ideas from the other counties and municipalities back to the table. So just wanted to thank you for your time.
Yeah, as well as checking, are the cities going far enough as 2%? Yes.
And if you guys have this in Excel, could we get it?
Yes.
I have it.
There is a more detailed section, because I think what I was trying to do was get it just quick reference, and there is like literally the language around it that you can get a little bit more context, so those are different. Yeah, those.
That'd be great. Thank you, guys.
Alrighty, thank you for the extra time, everyone. Meeting is adjourned.
I,
This is the first time that